The Alpha's Rejected Mate. A Werewolf Shifter Romance Audiobook. Written by Rain Hart. Chapter 1. The Ceremony of Bonds. The moon altar rose like a bone from the earth, pale and luminous against the cobalt dusk. Fog laced the clearing with slow-moving silver, the air thick with sacred incense and cold expectancy. All of White Shadow Hollow had gathered, warriors in fur-lined armor, elders draped in ash-dyed robes, children clutching mothers' hems with wide, glowing eyes. This was the night of the bonding, when the moon would whisper fate into the blood of her children. Aveline Rowan stood at the very edge of the crowd, half-shadowed beneath the twisted limb of an elder pine, her breath shallow, quiet as snowfall. She should not have come. She was nothing. A girl without a wolf. A burden at best. And yet, her heart had insisted. Mistress Elwyn's voice echoed in her memory. Sometimes the moon does not choose the strongest, child. Sometimes she chooses the quietest. But even the warmth of that memory couldn't still the tremble in her hands. Tonight, the Alpha heir would hear the call of his mate. And tonight, she would learn how far from the light she truly stood. Darian Vexley was the center of gravity. The moonlight bowed for him. He stood at the altar's peak, tall as the stone pillars behind him, dressed in black ceremonial leathers trimmed with frost fox fur. A silver torque encircled his throat, engraved with the ancient runes of Vexley blood. His hair, raven dark and wind-swept, moved only slightly despite the winter gusts. Eyes the color of molten amber surveyed the assembled wolves, burning with silent command. His power was palpable, coiled like a predator beneath the skin. Beside him, Elder Maine raised his withered arms. Tonight, he intoned, the moon chooses. Blood will stir. Bonds will be made. A hush fell. The air tightened. The wind died. Darian exhaled. Then everything shifted. It was not lightning or thunder or flame. It was a silence that pierced. Aveline felt it like a blade sliding between her ribs. The tug. No. Her body locked. Her vision blurred. The crowd parted, not for her, but around her. Heads turned. Whispers started. Darian's gaze slammed into hers. In that instant, every breath she had ever taken unraveled. It was not desire. It was recognition, terrible, undeniable. The Alpha had felt it. She was his mate. The hush turned fevered. Movement flurried. Elder Maine's lip curled in surprise. Aveline stood frozen, her fingers clenched around the edge of her shawl, heart galloping. Her knees trembled. Please. Darian stepped forward. The crowd leaned in. His mouth opened. The words that followed would be legend. I reject her. Silence. No gasp. No thunder. Just a vacuum of disbelief. I do not accept this bond, Darian said again, voice clear, unflinching. She bears no wolf. She is weak. The moon heirs. His words struck like claws across skin. Aveline blinked. Not tears. Not yet. Elder Maine chuckled, dry as bone. Then it is done. The bond is broken. The words echoed in her ears like a death toll. The moment cracked open. And the laughter came. It began low, one mocking snicker from a thick-shouldered warrior in the second row. Then another. Then the murmurs bloomed into a tidal wave of cruel delight. Look at her face. She really thought. A wolf with no shape. As Luna. She can't even shift. Aveline dropped to her knees. Not by choice. Her legs had simply vanished beneath her. The cold stone of the altar bit into her skin. She folded forward slightly, shawl trailing like wilted petals across the floor. Her hair, pale as frost, curtained her face. She wished the earth would open and take her whole. Elder Maine's voice cut through the chaos like an executioner's blade. This is further proof of imbalance in the hollow. If the moon is misdirecting herself to weak bloods, then something must be done. He turned his sunken eyes to the gathered wolves. Let her be cast out. To the border. Let the wilds make use of her if they can. Murmurs of agreement rose. Cast out. Like trash. Aveline's fingers clenched tighter on the stone. Somewhere above, the moon loomed, silent and full. And something in her broke. No, something in her rose. She didn't stand. But she lifted her chin. Her voice, when it came, was soft. Not defiant. Not proud. But raw, like wind across shattered glass. If I am useless, why did the moon choose me? The crowd faltered. Her question was not meant for them. She was speaking to her. To the moon. To the divine. I never asked to be chosen, she whispered. But if you did, if you see something in me I can't yet see. She swallowed. Then let me prove it. A gust of wind stirred the mist. A hush fell again. And for one heartbeat, one blink, the altar stone behind her glowed. Not bright. Not blazing. Just a shimmer. A flicker of light across a forgotten symbol, an ancient wolf rune buried beneath years of soot and moss. No one noticed. Except a shadowed figure at the edge of the crowd. Tobrin Willen stiffened, his eyes narrowing as he watched the girl kneeling alone. And something beneath his ribs stirred, something he couldn't name. After the ceremony, as the others celebrated new bonds, howled, danced, drank, Aveline sat in silence, alone by the frost-rimed steps. She did not weep, but her hands trembled in her lap like fallen leaves. Mistress Elwyn had once told her, the pain of being invisible is nothing compared to the pain of being seen and rejected. She understood that now. A flicker of movement. Tobrin. He approached slowly, his bootsteps muted in the snow. He said nothing, only offered a wool cloak, clean, simple, the color of storm clouds. Aveline hesitated, then took it with shaking fingers. Their eyes met, just briefly. He said that should not have happened, then turned and walked away. That night, she did cry. Not loudly. Not for attention. Alone in her straw-lined bed at the edge of the village, wrapped in the cloak Tobrin had given her, she let the tears bleed silently into the fabric. When dawn came, she would be exiled. But for now, she whispered one last prayer to the moon. Not for mercy. Not even for justice. But for strength. Chapter 2: The Girl in the Snow. The snow came down in sheets, soft at first, then biting, then relentless. Aveline walked in silence, her breath catching in thin, painful gasps. Each step was a test of will. Her boots, already cracked and worn, soaked through long ago. The hem of her dress dragged behind her like a drowned thing, heavy with slush. Around her, trees loomed like silent sentries, branches weighed with hoarfrost, their dark limbs clutching at the pale sky. She had no idea how long they'd been walking. Time blurred when you were being exiled. The road behind her, such as it was, had long disappeared under snow. There were no signs, no markers. Just the wind and the cold and the crunch of boots behind her. For guards accompanied her. 3 of them had laughed when Elder Main announced her sentence. They marched now with smug ease, wrapped in heavy furs, their breath steaming in the cold. The 4th man, Tobrin, had said nothing the entire journey. He walked a few paces behind her, as if keeping distance was a form of courtesy. But every time the wind shifted, she felt his gaze on her back like a weight. Like warmth she didn't know what to do with. Aveline stumbled. Her knee slammed into something buried beneath the snow, stone or root. She couldn't tell, and she hit the ground hard. A gasp tore from her lips. Cold bit through her shawl like teeth. Her fingers splayed against the snow, trembling. The guards didn't stop. One of them laughed. Can't even walk straight. Maybe the wolves will eat her quick and save us the trouble. Aveline clenched her jaw and pushed herself up with shaking arms. Her cloak had torn. A jagged corner of it fluttered loose, snatched by the wind like a leaf. It danced through the air, a slip of gray, and vanished into the snow-thick trees. Panic struck her. She lunged for it, as if that scrap were her last thread to dignity, but the wind was cruel. The cloth tumbled out of reach, vanishing into the drifts. The guards barked another laugh. Only Tobrin moved. He stepped forward, not quickly, but with purpose, his arm lifting against the wind. He braced himself in front of her, shoulders square, blocking the worst of the gusts. His coat snapped behind him like a banner, eyes narrowed against the storm. "You should stay down for a moment," he said quietly. She flinched, expecting mockery. But it never came. The other guards kept walking. Tobrin remained. Aveline's breath shook. Her lips were blue. But she nodded, slowly, and sank to her knees in the snow again, this time with something closer to grace. And with numb fingers, she brushed through the snow until, beneath the surface, she found the corner of the torn cloth. She pressed it to her chest. It smelled faintly of smoke and lavender. Mistress Elwyn's tinctures. She folded the scrap tightly and slipped it into the lining of her bodice. A secret. A shield. They walked again. This time, she kept her eyes forward, focused on the next step, and the next. She did not look back, not even when the gates of White Shadow Hollow vanished behind the curve of the hill. The path narrowed as the forest thickened. Fog rose from the snow in soft coils. Pines closed in on either side like black teeth. The air grew heavier, tinged with something ancient and bitter. This was not just the edge of the village. This was the edge of Velmora, the land where laws ended and legends began. By dusk, they stopped at a clearing where an old shrine stood, half buried beneath snowdrifts and time. The twisted bones of a once sacred post jutted from the earth, its carvings worn to whispers. A makeshift campfire was struck. Tobrin and the others didn't speak much. They didn't need to. This was her final night under guard. At dawn, she would be left behind. Alone. They offered no tent, only a threadbare blanket and space near the fire. Aveline took neither. Instead, she curled beneath a pine, the roots knotted like ribs above her, and wrapped herself in her ragged cloak. The torn edge, the one she'd salvaged, rested near her heart. Snow fell thick and slow, like ash from the sky. She didn't sleep, not at first. Her thoughts tangled like brambles, sharp and painful. Was I truly so foolish to think he might choose me? The memory of Darian's eyes burned beneath her lids. Not just cold. Empty. She had looked up at him as a believer stares at a star. And he had snuffed it out without blinking. Sometime past midnight, sleep claimed her. Not gently. Not kindly. She dreamt of silver. Not metal. Not moonlight. But silver voice, a sound like wind through bone and silk, weaving through the pinewood with hypnotic rhythm. In the dream, she stood on a frozen lake, barefoot, hair trailing in the wind. Above her, the sky was endless and hollow, the stars pulsing like living things. A presence stirred behind her. Not seen. Felt. "You were not made to fight," the voice murmured. "You were made to still the storm." Aveline turned, but there was nothing. Only a pulse of energy, ancient, gentle, vast. Then the dream shattered. She woke with a start. Her fingers were clenched, nails biting into her palm. Her heart raced. She lay still for a long time, breath fogging in the cold air. Then, without a word, she pushed herself up and walked to the stream that wound near the shrine. The ice had cracked at the edge. Water burbled beneath. She knelt and dipped her hands into the freezing current. Once. Twice. A third time. Each time her fingers turned more numb. She didn't stop. Wash it away. The fear. The shame. The doubt. Let the river take it. When she returned to the clearing, Tobrin was awake, seated on a fallen log, sharpening his blade by firelight. He didn't speak. But when she passed, he looked up briefly. Their eyes met. And she saw something strange. Not pity. Not regret. But respect. Chapter 3. The First Howl. The trees here no longer whispered, they watched. Their snow-laced branches bowed low, heavy with silence. The world beyond the path had vanished into white, every breath a ghost in the air. Frost clung to Aveline's lashes. Her bones ached from cold and from something else, something nameless that tugged low in her chest. They were close now. Soon, the guards would turn back, and she would walk into the rift alone. She didn't look at them. Not even Tobrin, who had silently walked beside her since morning, not once breaking ranks though his shadow always hovered just slightly closer than it should have. She only listened to the wind, to the snow, to the breathless hush that preceded a shift in fate. The silence broke when someone screamed. It wasn't the forest. Not this time. It was one of the guards. A blur of movement struck from the trees, small, fast, snarling. The boy, a scout in training, fell back, his shoulder slick with crimson. Another shape slammed into the snow beside him. Teeth flashed. The other guards drew their weapons too late. Aveline gasped. It wasn't a beast. It was a boy. Barely 16. But not himself. Killian. She recognized him even through the change, golden hair tangled with snow, fingers clawed, eyes gone wild. His body spasmed with the half-shift, muscles tearing through skin, mouth warped into a snarl far too wide for a human face. He's shifting wrong, one of the guards hissed, stepping back. He's berserking, said another. The plague. No, Tobrin said sharply, his sword drawn. He's young. It can still be reversed if we stun him. But Killian howled. The sound wasn't human. Wasn't wolf. It was wrong. A scream that scraped the inside of the skull. Trees shook. Snow fell like ash. Aveline stumbled backward, heart stammering. One guard rushed in, blade drawn. Too slow. Killian slammed into him, teeth snapping on the man's throat. The scream died before it could reach the air. Blood stained the snow in bright, vulgar red. The guards froze. Even Tobrin did. No one moved. No one could. Except her. Aveline didn't think. Her body moved on instinct, an ache pulling her forward, as if something inside her answered a call too old to question. She walked toward him. Toward the snarling boy. Toward the death everyone else feared. Girl, one of the guards shouted behind her. Don't. Tobrin's voice was lower. Aveline, get back. But she kept walking. Snow soaked her boots. The wind cut her cheeks. Killian turned toward her, body jerking with convulsions. Spit and blood flecked his lips. His hands were claws now. His pupils were gone, replaced by that eerie, full moon silver. His body crouched. He would pounce. She knelt. The forest stilled. No one breathed. Aveline pressed her hands gently to the snow in front of her and began to hum. Not a song. Not quite. A low, broken tune, nothing any wolf had taught her. It had come to her years ago, unbidden, in dreams and silence. A lullaby sung in a tongue older than words. Her voice was quiet, no louder than the wind. But it carried. It filled. Not the air, but the space beneath it. Beneath the fear. Beneath the rage. Killian's body shuddered. His claws twitched. And then Aveline sang. Hush now, child of fong and flame. The moon has called your restless name. Lay down your rage, your blood-soaked cry. And let the stars sing soft reply. The words curled into the cold like breath on glass. Killian's snarl faltered. His limbs trembled, but didn't strike. Aveline's voice barely wavered. The forest weeps, the shadows bend. But in this hush, the wounds can mend. No claws, no fear, no need to fight. You're safe within the silver night. Something ancient passed through the stillness. Not silence. Not power. Something older. Killian's body shuddered. His claws twitched. She lowered her head further and let the hum deepen, let it resonate. Her breath pulsed with it. Her chest ached. Her palms burned. The energy pouring from her wasn't hers alone. It came from somewhere far deeper. Somewhere not her, but not separate. Killian snarled once weakly. Then, like ice cracking under warmth, the tension in his limbs collapsed. He dropped to the snow, trembling, breathing, sobbing. His hands returned to fingers. His eyes rolled back into blue. He curled into himself, moaning like a sick pup. The forest didn't move. No one spoke. Aveline lifted her head, tears tracking down her cheeks. Not from fear. From release. Her limbs felt like ash. Her ears rang. She swayed slightly. Toberon caught her before she fell. He knelt beside her, hands firm on her shoulders. You, gods above, what did you do? She blinked up at him, dazed. I only sang. Killian whimpered softly. Toberon turned to the others. Get him restrained. Now. One of the guards hesitated, then moved toward the boy, throwing a fur cloak over his shaking form. Aveline sagged in Toberon's arms, the tremor in her muscles refusing to still. And then, boots crunched behind them. She didn't need to look to know who had come. The weight of his presence was unmistakable. Darian Vexley stood at the edge of the trees, tall and silent, wrapped in a deep gray cloak. His black hair glinted with frost, and his amber eyes burned. He had arrived sometime during the chaos, and he had seen everything. For a moment, no one spoke. Then one of the guards cleared his throat. Alpha Vexley. We didn't, she just. She calmed a berserker. Darian's voice was low, unreadable. Toberon stood, shielding Aveline behind him. Yes, she did. Darian's eyes moved over Aveline's small form, barely upright against the snow. They lingered. Longer than they should have. She's not trained, he said finally. She didn't need to be. It could have gone wrong. But it didn't. The silence between the two men was tight. Then Darian's jaw clenched. She got lucky. The words struck her like stones. Aveline flinched, barely breathing. She had calmed a berserker. She had saved them. And still, he couldn't give her more than that. Luck? Was that all she was to him? A risk? An embarrassment? An unwanted tether? Toberon's hand curled into a fist, but he said nothing. Darian's gaze flicked down once more. His expression gave nothing away, but something in his shoulders shifted. As if the image of her, fragile but upright in the snow, haunted more than it should. He turned away. Continue the exile, he said. Then walked into the trees. Killian stirred beside her, blinking up with fevered eyes. He reached weakly for her hand. Your voice, he whispered. It sounded like moonlight. Aveline bowed her head. Her fingers curled around the scrap of cloak still tucked near her heart. The others may not have seen, but someone had. And she would carry that truth alone if she had to. Because even if they wouldn't say it, even if he wouldn't admit it, she mattered. Chapter 4: Whispers in the Hollow. The village at the edge of the world did not welcome her with warmth, but it did not cast her out. And that, perhaps, was enough. Aveline stepped over the crooked threshold of the healer's hut in silence, her cloak damp from melted snow and her boots stained red where she had knelt beside the bleeding boy. She smelled of pine sap and blood, the remnants of something she had not yet dared to name, something ancient still humming faintly in her bones. Sit, said the old woman inside without looking up. Aveline hesitated only a breath before obeying. The hut was dim, lit by fat candles dripping wax down bone-shaped holders. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the beams like sleeping bats, their scents mingling: thyme, wormroot, elderbark. In the corner, a black-furred fox dozed atop a pile of folded linens, one ear twitching. The woman at the table was older than any wind Aveline had ever known. Her name was Mira. She had lived through 3 Alpha Ascensions and remembered when White Shadow Hollow had been more than a dumping ground for the unwanted. You're lucky I was still awake, she said as she ground fever leaf with practiced rhythm. Not that many here would have opened their door, even for a girl who sings monsters to sleep. Aveline winced. I didn't mean to. Don't apologize. Mira didn't look at her. That boy's alive because of you. They'll all pretend it was something else. They'll forget your voice and remember the fear. That's how border folk survive. Aveline looked down at her hands. Her fingertips still tingled faintly. What did you do? Mira asked then, quieter. Not what you think you did. What did you feel? Aveline shook her head. I heard something. Inside. Like a song I used to know. But not words. Just warmth. Mira made a low sound, more breath than voice. She reached across the table, took Aveline's hand in her weathered fingers, and pressed the girl's palm to a bundle of fresh wolf sprig. Close your eyes. Aveline obeyed. The herb was cool against her skin. Then, a shimmer, faint as starlight. Her palm grew warm. Beneath it, the wolf sprig glowed. Just for a second. Pale blue, like frost beneath moonlight. Mira let go. Aveline opened her eyes. The herb was no longer green. Its edges had silvered. The light was gone. But the silence that followed felt charged. Spirits, Mira whispered, reverently. You have it. Aveline blinked. I don't understand. Mira didn't answer her directly. She turned instead and began rummaging through a battered chest, muttering to herself. All these years. Elwyn wasn't just guessing. Soothers, no, not just that. Not just a calming touch. Blood memory. Blood magic. It's in you. Dormant, but waking. It always wakes with pain. Aveline watched her, stunned. Then Mira turned back, her eyes sharp as glass. You may not have a wolf child, but something older sleeps in you. Older than shifting. Older than the council's laws. The Hollow doesn't need another warrior. It needs you. The village did not agree. By dawn, word had spread of the incident in the snow. No one said her name, not directly, but she felt the stares. Heard the mutters. She's the one with no shape. No bloodline. No claim. She sings to the sick, but what else does she do? She should have been left out there. They let her stay. But just. Mira gave her a corner in the hut, a nest of furs near the fire, and endless tasks to keep her hands busy. Aveline took them all without complaint, grinding poultices, boiling roots, binding sprains. She didn't speak much, but she listened. She learned the names of every child who came for balm. She remembered every wolf's limp, every scar, every cough in the night. And slowly, without knowing why, she began to craft little talismans from bone and thread. Tiny necklaces, each one tied with care. Some held beads of dried berries, others tiny carved teeth. When she gave them to the wolf cubs, she didn't explain. She just smiled and said, "So the forest remembers you." By the second week, she no longer flinched at the cold. She wandered farther from the village edge, collecting bark and mushrooms, always returning before dusk. The woods spoke in ways the villagers never did. And she spoke back softly under her breath. Sometimes, at twilight, she would sit beneath the old cedar that grew just past the ridge. It was gnarled and half-hollowed, its trunk twisted like a knuckle, but its roots reached deep. It felt like a secret no one else noticed. One night, after the village lights had dimmed and Myra's breathing had deepened into sleep, Aveline returned to the tree with something clutched tight in her hand. A torn scrap of fabric. Gray. Weathered. Edged with soot and time. The piece of her cloak she'd carried since exile. She knelt at the base of the cedar and began to dig. Only a shallow hollow. Just enough. She placed the cloth inside with careful fingers. Not like trash. Like burial. Then, softly, too softly for even the wind to steal, she whispered, "I can't let them see I'm still afraid." The words made her throat tighten. But once spoken, they released something in her. She covered the cloth with snow. Then sat with the tree for a long time. Not waiting. Just being. Mira noticed. Of course she did. But she said nothing. Not even when she found a small, dried blood stain on a bandage Aveline had handled. She pricked it with a drop of silverroot extract. Watched as it shimmered. Her hands trembled. Later that night, she wrote a single sentence in her tattered lorebook. The line is not broken. She bears the song. Aveline never saw Mira watching her from the doorway. Didn't see the way the old woman's expression shifted. Not fear. Not awe. But hope. The kind only the truly forgotten ever dared to feel. Chapter 5. A Glance Across Fire. The village square flickered with firelight casting long, dancing shadows against the stone and frost-crusted walls. Snow had been cleared in wide circles around the bonfires, but cold still clung to every breath, every wool-lined sleeve, every wooden stool pulled close to the flames. The monthly patrol had returned from the border. The tradition was old, a night of food, reports, and silent reassurances that the wilds had not yet swallowed them whole. Tonight, Darian Vexley stood at the center of it all. His cloak billowed behind him like storm clouds as he moved between flames, a silent presence that turned heads and stilled conversation. He did not speak unless addressed. He did not smile. He did not need to. He was Alpha-born. He was command. But for the first time in months, he had come here, to the forgotten edges. And Aveline had no idea why. She stood at the outermost ring of the gathering, half-shadowed beside Myra's worn herb cart, arms wrapped around herself. She hadn't wanted to come. But Mira had pressed a satchel into her hands and said simply, "Let them see you, child." So she had come. Not to be seen, but to serve. She handed out steam-warmed poultices to warriors with cracked knuckles, slipped tiny carved bones to the pups who clung to their mother's cloaks, poured broth for an elder with frost-bitten fingers, and tried not to look at him. But the moment came anyway. Aveline felt it like a ripple through her skin, a sudden silence where sound should be. Her eyes lifted. Across the fire, Darian looked at her. The air between them did not move. The crackle of the flames dulled. The heat became almost unbearable. His eyes, amber bright, burning beneath the shadows of his lashes, locked with hers, unreadable. She froze. Every part of her wanted to meet that gaze with defiance. But her body remembered. The rejection. The shame. She looked away. She turned quickly, pretending to adjust the bandages stacked beside her. But her hands trembled, and a piece of cloth slipped to the snow. She bent to retrieve it. Behind her, the fire cracked. Behind her, voices rose again. But she could still feel his gaze, like a phantom hand resting at the back of her neck. The complaints started not long after. They still let her near the children? She doesn't even shift. She could be a curse. She has no lineage. No name. She brings trouble. You saw what happened with the boy. Who knows what she did to him? Darian stood still, listening. He said nothing. Not at first. Until a man, older, high-voiced, braver in drink than truth, spat near her feet and muttered, the pack would be safer if she were left where they found her. Aveline's breath caught. Before she could speak, before anyone could, Darian moved. He stepped between her and the man. Not violently. Not even swiftly. Simply placed himself. The firelight caught the line of his jaw, sharp with tension. His voice was low. "You forget yourself." The man blinked. I didn't mean." "You did." Darian didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. But every wolf nearby stilled. And for one breathless moment, Aveline stared at the back of the man who had once rejected her as worthless, and now stood between her and a blade made of words. She couldn't understand it. Didn't dare to. Darian turned and walked away. Later, the fire burned lower. Children had been carried home. Warriors leaned on flagons and aches. The snow returned in drifting flakes. Aveline sat alone beside the far fire pit, pulling a bone charm from her pocket. Her fingers were too cold to knot it properly. "Here." She looked up. Tobrin crouched beside her, his green eyes earnest. He took the charm gently from her hand, threading the cord through the tiny holes she'd carved. "You don't always have to lower your head when he looks at you." Aveline's throat tightened. "I don't." Her voice wavered. "I'm not trying to." "I know." Tobrin's voice was steady. "You're trying to disappear. But even ghosts deserve warmth." She stared at him. Then, slowly, something in her eased. Just a little. The snow softened around them. The fire hissed. Her hands stilled. And in her chest, the first hint of recognition curled like smoke. Someone saw her. Far behind them, Darian stood at the edge of the clearing, speaking quietly with another scout. But his eyes strayed. Just once. To her. She wasn't looking. She was laughing, barely, a breath of warmth he hadn't seen since. He blinked. And for just a heartbeat, the image of his brother rose behind his eyes, Canaan's gaze, wild and lost the night the madness took him. It had been Aveline's voice that cut through that same wildness in the boy Killian. Her voice. Her presence. Soft. Steady. Lunar. Darian looked away. But when he turned to leave, he looked over his shoulder once more. And the weight in his chest did not lessen. Chapter 6: The Rule of Strength. The council hall was colder than the forest. Built from carved stone and old bones, it rose like a fong above the village center. No fire was lit within it. Only torches lined the walls, burning blue with witch flame, casting elongated shadows that made the gathering feel more like a trial than a meeting. And perhaps that's what it was. Aveline stood at the center. Alone. Surrounded by wolves who did not see her as one of their own. The room reeked of judgment. And worse, of certainty. Elder Maine stood above, robed in night-black ceremonial garb, his voice as thin as ice and just as sharp. "We gather," he said, "to speak of law, of tradition, of what must be protected." His gaze, hollow, sunken, drifted down to her like a blade waiting to fall. "This girl bears no wolf. She is of no bloodline, no shift. And yet, the moon marked her May bond to our alpha heir, proof enough, I think, that even fate can err." A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Aveline heard them, felt them cut. Still, she did not lower her gaze. She had learned to bear weight without crumbling. Maine continued, "She calms beasts, yes. But so do fire pits. So do leashes. We do not crown leashes. We do not crown weakness." He stepped closer to the circle that contained her, his voice rising. "She has disrupted the order. Drawn attention from the council. Emboldened dissidents in the borderlands. And now, she sings lullabies to berserkers and calls it a gift." Someone scoffed. Maine turned toward the gathered pack and spoke the words that sealed it. "She is not pack. She is a stain. I propose we strip her of the last thread she clings to, her name on our ledgers, her place on our lands. Let her go. Let her be what she is alone." The silence that followed was deafening. Aveline's pulse rang in her ears like distant thunder. Her mouth was dry, but she lifted her chin. And when she spoke, her voice was soft, but unwavering. "I don't want power." Her words fell gently into the stillness. "I don't want titles. Or blood. Or honor." She swallowed. "I just want to stay. To help. I know I don't look like you. I don't shift. I don't fight. But I feel when others are hurting. I remember every name. Every pain. Even if I can't change it." Her eyes swept the chamber, not pleading, just honest. "I don't need to be Luna. I just don't want to be discarded again." A beat. Then two. Then. Nothing. No voice rose for her. And worse. Darian didn't move. He stood among the council, arms crossed, expression carved from frost. Unreadable. Unmoving. Silent. His eyes didn't meet hers. And something in her chest, something small and shivering, folded in on itself. The ruling was adjourned. No final decree was shouted. No sentence cast in stone. But everyone knew what the silence meant. They simply let it settle like a fog. And that was how she left, through the side door, through the snow, through the crowd that parted but did not see her. She didn't cry. Not even when the cold bit her palms. Not even when the wind slapped her cheeks like open-handed scorn. She walked to the river. A narrow run, barely thawed in places, glistening like a serpent beneath the trees. She knelt beside it, as she had so many times before, and slowly, methodically, dipped her hands into the water. Once. Twice. A third time. Each rinse colder than the last. As if it might strip away what words had left behind. As if the cold might reach deep enough to erase the shame curled tight against her ribs. She didn't hear him approach. But she felt the stillness shift behind her, like the moment before a storm breaks. Tobrin. He didn't speak at first. Only crouched beside her, eyes searching her face. Her hands were still submerged in the water. "You don't have to do that," he said gently. She startled, pulling her fingers back too quickly. Water spilled across her skirt, but she didn't flinch. I just wanted to feel clean, she murmured. Tobrin was quiet. Then, you don't need to be washed of anything. They should be the ones with hands in the river. Aveline blinked. And blinked again. The heat behind her eyes rose sharp and sudden. She turned away before it could break. Tobrin didn't press her. He stood, brushing snow from his coat, and stepped back. But before he left, he added quietly, "You stood taller than any of them today. Even him." She didn't ask who he meant. She didn't need to. Far behind them, hidden in the council's private chambers, Elder Main lit a fresh taper. The light flickered against stone, revealing a series of scrolls, each marked with sigils not seen since the Bloodfire Protocol was whispered into law. One scroll was already unfurled. A sketch. A totem. A war-born shape, mouth open in eternal howl, teeth lined with blood. He touched it with a fingertip. "She's in the way," he murmured. Behind him, a figure in dark armor stood silent. "I want it accelerated. Begin the trials." A pause. "And if she strays into the path?" Maine smiled. "She's already been discarded." Chapter 7. A Gentle Threat. The morning mist in the forest did not drift, it clung. It wove through the bare trees like memory, coiling around Aveline's ankles as she stepped carefully through frost-bitten underbrush. Her fingers, gloved and shaking, brushed along stems and brambles as she moved, searching for blackleaf and frost nettle, the two herbs Mira needed before nightfall. She liked the quiet here. Liked how the wind didn't ask questions. But today, the quiet felt wrong. Too tight. Too still. Like a held breath. She crouched beside a thorn bush, reaching for the purple-black leaves, when a snap cracked through the air behind her. Not a squirrel. Not wind. Boots. She froze. Straightened slowly. Turned. 3 figures stood half-shrouded in the mist. All men. All unfamiliar. But their armor, dark and matte, bore the etched crescent of the council. Her pulse thudded in her ears. They didn't speak. But the way they spread, like wolves surrounding a rabbit, spoke for them. "I'm just gathering herbs," she said softly. "I'll be on my way." "You've strayed far from your assigned bounds, girl," said the tallest, stepping forward. His voice was smooth. Too smooth. Dangerous, for someone with no teeth. Another chuckled. "Maybe she's out here singing to the trees again. Think we'll hear a lullaby." Aveline stepped back. The third man moved to block her path. That's when she saw the glint of a chain hanging from his belt, a medallion attached. A carved sigil. Fangs. Fire. A spiral. Warborn. Her blood ran cold. "You're not guards," she whispered. "Didn't say we were," said the first. He lunged. Aveline ran. She didn't scream. Didn't look back. Snow flung behind her in sprays. Her lungs burned. She didn't think, just moved, through trees, over root and stone, her breath ragged, heart crashing against her ribs. But the woods weren't just forest. They were alive. A shape dropped in front of her. She skidded to a halt too late. A hand slammed her shoulder, sending her sprawling against the frozen ground. Her head cracked against a root. Stars exploded behind her eyes. And then a growl. Not human. Not behind her. Ahead. Darian hit the attacker with a feral snarl. He didn't shift, didn't need to. He moved like thunder, silent until the strike, unstoppable once it came. The man barely had time to scream before Darian's fist broke his jaw. The others turned, too slow. From the trees, Tobrin emerged with blades drawn, his face a storm of pure, silent fury. Steel clashed with bone and breath. Snow turned crimson. By the time it ended, one attacker had vanished into the mist. 2 lay unconscious. Aveline hadn't moved. She sat where she'd fallen, hair tangled, cloak half torn, a thin line of blood at her hairline. Darian turned toward her. But Tobrin was already kneeling at her side. "Aveline," he said gently. "You're safe. You're all right." She blinked up at him, dazed. "I didn't, I know." His voice was low. "You did everything right." His hand reached to check the cut on her temple. She flinched. He hesitated, then simply held her fingers instead. Behind them, Darian paced a few steps away, jaw clenched, eyes burning gold beneath the shadow of his lashes. She shouldn't be wandering alone, he snapped. She was gathering herbs for sick pups, Toberin replied, not looking at him. Not hunting demons. It's still reckless. Aveline lowered her gaze, but Toberin's hand squeezed hers slightly. Then, unless that was the point, Darian added. Someone sent them. That sigil. He stopped himself. His tone changed. Get her back to the village. I'll track the third. Toberin looked up sharply. You shouldn't go alone. I'm not asking. He left without another word. But not before his eyes flicked to Aveline. Just once. Lingering. Like maybe he wanted to say something else. But didn't know how. Back in the village, Mira scowled at the blood on Aveline's cloak. They came after you? Why? Aveline sat quietly, letting the old woman stitch the tear along her sleeve. She didn't answer. Not because she didn't want to. Because she didn't know. But the shape of the medallion still burned behind her eyes. Later that night, when the village had gone quiet and the fires burned low, Aveline crept to the nursery. 3 pups lay nestled under blankets of fur and leaves. One, his paw twisted from birth, whimpered softly, ears twitching from a fever that hadn't broken in days. She knelt beside him and began to hum. Not loud, not pretty, just steady. Sleep now, my silver child. The moon will keep your name. The wind will kiss your trembling paws. The dark will never claim. The pup stilled. The fever didn't vanish. But something in his breathing eased. Her hand stroked gently behind his ear as she whispered, not to the pup, but to the goddess she could never quite see. If I can help them, if I can ease them. A breath. Then let that be enough. Let me stay. She sat there until dawn. When she rose, her cloak hem was stiff with frost. And in her pocket, she found something she hadn't placed there. A small carved token. The Warborn sigil. Left behind by one of the attackers. She stared at it for a long time. Then tucked it into her satchel, hidden beneath the soft bones she'd carved for the young. Some threats came with claws. Others came smiling. But this one, this quiet piece of wood carved with madness, told her something far worse. She was never supposed to survive the forest that day. Chapter 8. The Pack Breaks. Snow fell like ash that morning. White Shadow Hollow lay wrapped in pale silence, its crooked roofs heavy with frost, chimneys coughing thin curls of smoke into the gray sky. Children's laughter echoed faintly from the central square, already fading into fog. Then a howl. Ragged. Piercing. Wrong. It didn't rise, it tore its way out of the woods. Moments later, it was joined by another. And another. And then. Screaming. Aveline dropped the basket of herbs she was sorting and bolted outside, heart already galloping. A gust of wind slammed into her as she reached the edge of the healer's yard. Down the slope, beyond the low fences of the village, black shapes writhed in the mist, fast, feral, wrong. A mass of wolves. But not just wolves. Their limbs twisted at unnatural angles, eyes glowing with sick fire. Mouths too wide. Howls echoing through the woods like broken hymns. Berserkers. Beta guards scrambled, their horns too slow. One was already down, his throat torn. 2 others tried to hold the line but were forced back, blood streaking the snow like ribbons. A pup screamed. His mother shoved him behind a stone wall, shielding him with her body, fangs bared, but her hands shook. Chaos spread like fire. And Aveline. Aveline ran toward it. Someone shouted after her. Toberin, maybe. She didn't stop. Didn't think. The snow pulled at her feet. The screams tore at her heart. She passed the last guard post, crossed the village boundary, and stepped into the storm. There were 12 of them. Too many. Her breath caught. The wolves weren't acting in unison. They were devouring each other between attacks. Some snapped at thin air. One rammed its head repeatedly into a tree until the bark turned red. Froth foamed at their mouths. Whatever control they'd once had, it was gone. This wasn't madness. It was infection. And it was spreading. Aveline stumbled, her feet sliding in a mix of snow and blood. Her pulse hammered behind her eyes. Then one of them turned toward her. Snarled. Charged. She didn't move. Instead, she fell to her knees. Thrust her blood-chilled hands into the snow. Closed her eyes. And sang. Soft now, child of Fong and Flame. You are not alone. The moon remembers every name. Come, let silence hold. Her voice barely rose above the wind. But it reached. The wolf nearest her faltered mid-leap. Its limbs twitched violently. Its eyes, white-hot, met hers. And she poured herself into the space between. Her gift was not volume. It was intimacy. A trembling thread between spirit and bone. A lullaby for rage. Sleep, my storm. Sleep, my sorrow. No more pain. No more tomorrow. One wolf dropped. Then two. Then five. The woods shifted. The very air held its breath. A sound moved beneath her voice, not harmony, not echo. Resonance. A heartbeat too large to be hers. She felt the world tip. Felt it inside her chest, raw and vast and unbearable. And then, it snapped. The last berserker held once, choked on it. And collapsed. Aveline's mouth fell silent. Her body did not. She crumpled sideways, fingers twitching, breath stuttering. The world spun. Her vision blurred, the edges bleeding white. The last thing she saw was fur. Dark, shadowed fur, surging toward her. And a pair of eyes like wildfire. Then, darkness. Darian caught her before she hit the ground. He didn't think. Didn't hesitate. Just moved. Her body was weightless in his arms. Too limp. Too cold. She smelled of herbs and blood and something else, something ancient, like moonstone and memory. His heartbeat slammed against his ribs. She's burning out. Myra's voice snapped from behind him. Get her inside. She didn't shift, someone whispered. She doesn't have a wolf. How did she do that? Did you see? They just stopped. Darian didn't answer them. Didn't care. He only looked down at the girl who'd risked herself again. For the pack that had all but discarded her. His arms tightened. The healer's hut was dim, too warm. He laid her on the cot, watched as Mira scattered powders and clove oil across her brow, checked her pulse, muttered beneath her breath in the old tongue. Darian stood back, hands clenched at his sides. His gaze never left Aveline. There was a cut across her palm, her knuckles raw where they'd struck frozen earth. Her lips moved faintly, soundless. Still trying to speak. Still trying to soothe. He hated the way his chest felt, tight, hot, unfamiliar. Not rage. Not pride. But something softer. More dangerous. Then her lips moved again. This time a whisper came through. I just wanted them to stop hurting. Darian froze. The breath caught in his throat. It wasn't meant for him. She wasn't even awake. But the words struck harder than any blade. Because he remembered, vividly, the sound his brother made the night he lost control. That terrible, endless howl. The begging in his eyes. Make it stop. And no one could. No one tried. Except now. She did. Behind him, someone spoke. Alpha, what do you want us to tell the council? Darian didn't look away from her. Nothing. But the wolves. Tell them it's handled. A beat of hesitation. Then boots retreating into snow. He stayed. Even as Mira fussed, as the herbs burned, as the light dimmed. He stayed. And didn't once let go of her hand. Outside the healer's hut, the village buzzed with fear and awe. Some murmured the word witch. Others whispered blessing. But the oldest, the ones who remembered stories meant to be forgotten, said something different. Moonkissed. And one of the berserkers, now curled in trembling sleep beneath thick furs, stirred once. And rasped a single, fractured word. Moon soothed. Chapter 9. Moonlight Recovery. Myra's hut was always warm. Not in the way fire was warm, but in the way old earth was, deep beneath layers of snow. It smelled of moss and dried rose hips, sweet birch bark and salves meant to soothe beasts and babies alike. The walls were lined with herbs and bones and secrets too quiet to speak aloud. Aveline had been lying beneath one of Myra's patched quilts for 3 days. Unmoving. Unspoken. Breathing, but only just. Her skin burned and froze by turns. Fevered dreams clung to her, whispering in languages not her own. The faces of wolves, kind, savage, twisted, beloved, blurred behind her lids. And through it all, the same scent followed her. Ash and pine. And something darker. Like storms trapped in steel. She knew it. It comforted her. It frightened her. Darian hadn't left. Not once. He stood beneath the lintel of the hut like a sentinel carved from stone. The villagers saw him, of course. And they whispered. They always whispered. Why's he here? For her. She's nothing. She doesn't shift. He should be with Lyria. She's just a weak blood stray. Why does it matter? He didn't answer them. Didn't even seem to hear them. But when Mira suggested that Aveline be moved to the hold for better treatment, he said, calmly, but with the kind of authority that ended arguments, "She stays where she feels safe." And no one brought it up again. Mira worked in silence. Darian listened to every breath Aveline took. Every whimper. Every twitch of her hand. She didn't cry out. But once, she whispered, so faintly that only he could hear, "I just wanted them to stop hurting." And it was like a blade, sliding beneath his ribs. He didn't speak. But he sat beside her bed that night. And didn't move for hours. By the 4th day, her fingers twitched. By the 5th, she stirred. Mira was by her side instantly, dropping herbs into boiling cloth, muttering softly as she brushed the sweat from Aveline's brow. Aveline blinked slowly. Silver-gray eyes, glassy with pain, settled on Myra's face. Then, on the man standing behind her. The one who hadn't moved. Aveline's throat worked. But no sound came. Mira turned toward Darian. "She's waking. You should." "I'll wait outside," he said. And he stepped out before the girl in the bed could gather enough strength to speak. Mira stayed until moonrise. She changed the bandages, tested Aveline's pulse, forced bitter tea between her lips. Then finally, when the girl had drifted into a light doze, she took a small blade and made a shallow prick on Aveline's fingertip. 1 drop of blood. Nothing more. But when it touched the silver-leaf tincture in Myra's bowl, it glowed. Faint. Moonlit. Alive. Mira didn't speak. She simply reached beneath the hearthstone, pulled out a small, leather-bound volume wrapped in faded green cloth, and tucked it deeper beneath the floorboards. She would not say the word. Not yet. But it echoed nonetheless. God chosen. Darian was still standing outside. Snow dusted his shoulders. His hands were bare despite the cold. The whispers from the village had faded. But they clung to him anyway. She's not your future. She's your undoing. And yet, he didn't leave. Not even when Tobrin came by with an update. She's stable now, his beta said quietly, glancing toward the curtained window. Mira thinks she'll wake fully by morning. Darian didn't respond. Tobrin studied him for a long moment. Then added softly, "You never watched me that closely when I took a spear to the ribs." Darian huffed something like a laugh. But it wasn't kind. Tobrin didn't push. He only said, "Careful, Darian. Mercy starts quiet. But it ends loud." Then left. That night, Aveline dreamed of her mother. A woman with soft hands and eyes like the forest in spring. She said nothing. Just touched Aveline's cheek and held her like something sacred. And when Aveline woke again, tears clung to her lashes. The door creaked open. Mira stepped in, then hesitated. Darian stood just behind her, coat dusted with frost, expression unreadable. Aveline blinked slowly. Her voice, scratchy, sore, broke the silence. "I'm still here." Mira smiled gently. "Yes, Moonchild. You're still here." Later, when the room had emptied and she was alone again, Aveline lay with her face turned to the wall, breath slow, body weak. But her heart ached. And the silence behind the door told her everything. He hadn't come in. He'd stayed. But not close enough. Not really. She pressed her hand to her chest, felt the slow thud, and whispered, "If I can make them feel less alone, even just once, then I don't need to be anything more." Outside the hut, Darian leaned against the stone wall, eyes closed. And for the first time in years, his control cracked just enough to feel it. Not duty, not shame, but guilt. Pure, hot, unforgiving. He hadn't protected her. He'd only watched. And she had been the one to save them all. Chapter 10. A soft voice in the dark. Aveline opened her eyes to darkness. Not the suffocating, empty black she'd known in childhood nightmares, but the soft hush of twilight. Shadows pooled in the corners of the small wool-lined hut where she'd been recovering, tending only the steadied breath of her own chest. She was alone. At least for now. She drew the quilt higher around her shoulders, the stitches familiar and comforting. Moonlight filtered through a narrow window, dusting the room with tendrils of silver. It felt like a lullaby, but she refused to listen. Not anymore. She had willed herself awake with one purpose. When Mira brought the herbs and warmed broth, Aveline blinked slowly, catching sight of Darian outside, pacing beneath the rafters. He froze when he saw her. Something in Aveline shrank. Because she could almost see it clearly now. She didn't want his pity. Not even his protection. So she turned her face to the wall and whispered before she lay back down. "I don't want your pity." Mira paused, head bowed. Darian lingered outside. The words turned the night, silent as snowfall, into something brittle. After sunrise, she refused to speak to him. He waited. Patience stretching between them as taut as a drawn bow. But when she didn't respond, he simply nodded at Mira, turned, and walked away. Without a second glance. Aveline stared at the door long after he left. Her chest felt hollow. She dressed silently in garments thick with scent of rosemary and brimstone, then grabbed her cloak with hands that trembled slightly. She would return to the border. To the only place that didn't expect anything of her. Darian watched her leave. Patrol excuse or not, he followed at a distance. His cloak swallowed her in shadow. His footsteps made no sound above the crunch of frost-hardened soil. She picked herbs by instinct, not need, almost somnambulant in her movements. It was protection she turned to now. Not from wolves. From him. When the cold finally made her pause, she knelt beside a fallen branch, wrapped in waning light. He stopped behind her again. But she did not look back. He cleared his throat softly. Not commanding. Not cold. "I'm sorry." She kept her head lowered, her voice flat. "Then don't come." He said nothing more. But when she stood to leave, his hand touched her shoulder. Not with force. With hesitation. Not enough to stop her. But enough to keep him from walking away. That night, she sat in the muted glow of a dying fire, carving tiny bone charms with slow, careful fingers. The cub's limp paw beside her twitched in sleep. His name was Bryn. She had stitched it wrong and erased it with trembling care. Darian lingered up the path, hidden by the thin timber. Tobrin joined him then, as quiet as the falling snow. He watched her, hands soft around the bone carving. "You don't have to bear everything." Aveline paused, carving tool mid-turn. "Heard you said she doesn't shift?" A flash of something, anger? Regret? Crossed Darian's face. "This isn't pity." Tobrin sighed under his breath. "She deserves more." Silence rose between them. Then Darian spoke, quietly, "She's not what they say." Tobrin didn't respond. Neither did Aveline, still bent over her carving. Before the moon set, Aveline finished the charm and tied it around Bryn's fevered neck. The bone and thread glowed faintly in the charcoal light. Bryn nuzzled it. It did light something. Someone. Darian exhaled, sharp. But Tobrin's whisper chased it into the dark. "You deserve better, too." Chapter 11. A flower between thorns. The snow had softened by twilight. It blanketed the clearing just beyond the tree line, brushing the roots of frost-blackened trees, cloaking the earth in hush and silver. The world held its breath, wrapped in the pause between heartbeat and howl. Aveline moved like a shadow through it. She knelt in the snow beneath an ancient pine, its branches creaking with the weight of winter. Around her, the sickliest of the hollow's young wolves nestled in scattered hay and tattered wool, tucked in makeshift beds. Their limbs twitched from fevered dreams. Eyes glowed dull in the gathering dark. She lit no fire. Instead, she sang. Softly. Almost too softly for the human ear. But not for theirs. Sleep, moon's child, under leaf and bone. The frost won't find you while I'm home. Breathe in slow and dream of light. The storm will pass before the night. The melody stirred the snow. It wasn't magic, not exactly. The lull in the air came from something quieter, older. A sound like warmth curling under your ribs. A mother's hum in a broken world. A heartbeat remembered after battle. Each word wove through the wolves, coaxing their ragged breath into rhythm. Even the smallest one, Riss, the runt with trembled paws, crept from his den and curled against her boot. She smiled and gently ran her fingers through his fur. Her lips did not stop singing, nor did her hands. Bone charms dangled from her belt, carved with patience and tiny prayers. She threaded one onto a leather cord and tied it carefully around Riss's neck. Then she murmured his name, Riss, as though it were sacred, as though his existence mattered. Darian stood hidden among the trees. His breath caught somewhere between lungs and lips. He hadn't meant to come. And yet he was here, arms crossed over his chest, heart thudding against his ribs like a wolf trapped behind bone. Watching her. Listening. That voice, it wasn't powerful, not in the way warriors were. But it slipped beneath skin. It unmade things inside him. Made the world quiet in a way even the strongest command could not. He remembered how his mother used to hum before the madness took her. That same softness. That same ache. Why does she give so much of herself? To wolves who may never thank her. To a village that would rather see her gone. He didn't know. He only knew he wanted to keep listening. Down in the clearing, a faint flicker shimmered over Riss's charm. Moonlight caught in the bone. Just for a moment. A silvery pulse. Aveline blinked, fingers hovering above the charm. Then she smiled faintly, as if it were nothing more than coincidence. But Darian saw it. Felt the hum in the air shift. Something had answered her lullaby. Not just wolves. Something older. Something watching. The next morning, the rumors began. She sings to the pups, one woman said, shaking her head. They don't yelp all night anymore, muttered a grizzled man by the well. She must have done something, another scoffed. Probably slipped Poppy into their stew. She's always poking around in plants. She's still useless, someone snapped. Can't even shift. Aveline heard it all. And said nothing. Only turned toward the well and dipped her hands into its icy basin. She scrubbed at her palms raw, aching. Not because they were dirty. Because she couldn't scrub out the fear. Fear of being seen. Of being needed. Of being wanted and having it ripped away. The water stung. Her breath hitched. But she didn't stop. She never did. Darian came again that evening. He didn't speak to her. Not yet. He stood farther than before. Watched the way she touched each cub with reverence. The way she sang even as her voice trembled with cold. The way she whispered each name like it was a blessing. No one has ever said my name like that, he realized. Not since his mother. Not with softness. Not with love. That night, Aveline remained under the tree long after the last cub had fallen asleep. She was humming again. No words this time. Just breath and tone. Darian finally stepped from the trees. She didn't flinch, but her shoulders tensed. You shouldn't be here, she said. I know. He crouched a few paces away. His voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. They say you make them sleep. Her hand paused mid-stroke on Riss's ear. Would that be a crime? No, a beat. I think it's a gift. She didn't reply. He looked down at the cubs nestled around her like a small living constellation. You remember all their names. I remember everyone no one else does. Silence bloomed between them again. It was softer now. Not empty. Just full of things neither dared say. As he turned to leave, she asked without looking up. Why do you keep coming? He stopped. Then, slowly said, Because I don't know how to forget the sound of your voice. She said nothing. But for the first time, she didn't ask him to go. Chapter 12, Fire Beneath Ice. The council chambers smelled of blood and smoke. Not fresh, nothing so vital. The scent here was old. Stale. Like ash left too long in the bones of a burned-out hearth. Aveline stood in the center of the stone hall alone. She wore no cloak. Just the pale linen Mira had given her that morning, its sleeves too long, the hem wet from snow. Her silver-gray eyes were dull in the cold torchlight, but steady. Unflinching. Around her, the circle of elders loomed like statues carved from frost-bitten oak. High-backed chairs. Black robes. No softness. No welcome. And at their head, Elder Maine. He rose slowly, bones creaking beneath his ceremonial mantle, mouth a thin, cruel line. We are gathered, he intoned, voice carrying through the vaulted space, to address the continuing disruption posed by the outlier Rowan. He did not call her Aveline. He never had. She is not of the hollow by blood, he went on, pacing. She holds no wolf form. She bears no allegiance to the laws of pack or moon. And yet she dares influence our young with songs that still their instincts. His eyes gleamed, wet and viperish. She sings submission into them. A scoff from one of the elders. A grunt from another. Elder, Darian's voice broke through, sharp and controlled. All heads turned. He stepped forward from the edge of the chamber, taller than most, his black armor dusted with snow. The silver of his Vexley sigil caught the firelight, cold and unyielding. Aveline felt his presence before she saw him. But when she turned, he wasn't looking at her. Only at Maine. She's done nothing but heal, Darian said flatly. Maine didn't blink. Alpha Vexley, your loyalty is to the council. My loyalty is to the protection of this land. And this village. Darian's voice dropped like a blade. She saved it. Twice. She calmed a dozen berserk pups in the hollow. And last week, she put herself between us and the Riftwood pack. Maine's smile was thin. And did she bleed for it? Yes. His jaw tightened. She did. A silence settled. Uneasy. Taut. Aveline looked at Darian then. Not as the boy who'd turned from her. Not as the soldier who hadn't spoken her name in front of others for moons. But as a man standing between her and exile. Her hands were cold. Her throat tight. Still, she stepped forward, voice soft but clear. If mercy disturbs your order, perhaps your order needs disturbing. Gasps. A hiss of breath. Maine's eyes burned with fury, but it was Darian who moved first. Not toward her. Not away. Just stood between them, as if the space around Aveline was his to shield. Aveline turned to him fully then, voice low enough only the chamber would hear. Do you believe me now? His answer came slower. Measured. I don't know if you're divine, he said. Or touched by something older than us. He met her eyes, truly, openly. But I know you're not a mistake. That, more than the words, nearly undid her. The verdict wasn't exile. It wasn't quite freedom either. The council dissolved in murmurs, Maine retreating into shadow like rod into wood. But no order passed could stop what had already shifted. The people had heard. So had the wolves. That night, Aveline walked into the forest alone. Not far, just beyond Myra's cottage, where the trees grew thin and snow clung to every branch like whispers. She crouched near a dying fire pit, hands trembling as she pulled a bundle from her satchel. The remnants of another cloak. Torn in the last battle. Stained with soot and frost. She buried it beneath the snow with careful fingers. No spell. No rite. Just her. Then, breath-catching, she whispered. I don't want to be afraid anymore. The wind shifted. And far above, the moon broke through the clouds, brief but blinding. In the shadows behind her, unseen, Darian watched. He didn't speak. He wouldn't. Not yet. But for the first time in his life, he wanted to believe that mercy could hold as much power as teeth and claws. That maybe, just maybe, a flower could bloom in ice. Chapter 13, Tobrin's Confession. The wind carried teeth tonight. Not the gentle hush of snow through pine, but a biting, ragged kind of cold that clawed beneath fur and cloth. The kind of cold that made even the strongest wolves glance over their shoulder, expecting shadows to bite. Aveline's breath steamed in the air as she knelt beside a thorn bush, tugging frost-wilted roots from the earth. Her fingers stung, raw and trembling from the cold, but she didn't stop. Mistress Elwyn would have warned her to go home. But Elwyn wasn't here. And home had never been a place for Aveline, it had only ever been a feeling. One she hadn't touched in weeks. The woods around her groaned, deep and low. A growl? No. Just wind through frozen boughs. She turned too late. The blur came fast, feral, loping wrong. Yellow eyes. Foam at its lips. No markings, no sigil. Not pack. Rogue. Aveline gasped, falling backward onto the snow as claws swiped, tearing her cloak. Then, a flash of green eyes. A body slamming into the beast. Tobrin. He wrestled the creature with brutal grace, his blade a shimmer of silver in the twilight. Blood sprayed, dark, steaming against the snow. The rogue howled once before Tobrin silenced it with a clean strike through its throat. Then all was still. Aveline sat stunned. Tobrin turned, his brow already bloodied, one arm hanging limply. "You shouldn't be this deep alone," he said, breath hitching. "I was only gathering roots," she whispered. "I didn't sense it." "It wasn't sane," Tobrin muttered. It moved like it had been driven. He dropped to his knees beside her. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Tobrin reached up with his good hand and brushed her hair back behind her ear, slow and reverent. "I'd fight 100 of them for you," he said quietly. She froze. Tobrin gave a small, crooked smile. Not embarrassed. Just real. "I don't want to be your burden," he said. "Or your war. But I want you to know this. I don't see you as weak. Or lost. I see a woman who still believes in soft things after being cut open 100 times. That's not weakness, Aveline." She swallowed hard. He didn't move closer. Didn't press. "I want you to be with someone who treasures that," he finished, gaze unwavering. "Even if it's not me." The snow fell in silence between them. Then Aveline exhaled, slow and aching. "Tobrin." He nodded once, already knowing. "I'm sorry," she said, voice raw. "But I can't think about love right now. I'm still trying to prove I deserve to stay." Tobrin smiled again, softer this time. "Then let me be the one who walks beside you while you do." He didn't stay long after that. But before leaving the village, Tobrin penned a note. Folded it once, sealed it with pine resin, and handed it to a sentry with strict instruction. To Darian Vexley. Eyes only. It read, "She doesn't need your pity. She needs your respect. And God's help you, Darian, if you still feel anything at all. Don't wait until she belongs to someone else to realize it. She's worth more than silence." Darian read it beneath moonlight. No one saw his face. No one heard the paper crumple in his gloved fist. Later that same night, Aveline sat beside Tobrin again. He was pale from blood loss. Mira had wrapped his side with tight bandages, and he slept uneasily near the hearth, breath shallow. She knelt beside him, tucking the blanket higher on his chest. And then, because she knew no other way to ease pain she couldn't touch, she sang. Soft. Slow. Like snow melting through fur. "Sleep, moon-touched heart. The night is long and kind. No teeth will take you. No rage will bind. Rest in the hush of the wolf mother's breath. Cradle of frost, far from death. You are not alone. You are not alone." Tobrin's breathing slowed. Then, barely above a whisper, eyes still closed, he murmured, "My mother used to sing that." Aveline froze. She hadn't learned it. The words had come from somewhere else. somewhere older. She reached for his hand, heart pounding. And that's when the door opened. Snow blew in with it. So did leather. Cold. Silence. Darian stood in the doorway, wind clawing through his hair. He hadn't meant to see this. Hadn't meant to feel this. Aveline holding Tobrin's hand. Her lips parted in song. Her eyes soft. Her voice made for lullabies and gentling madness. And not for him. Something cracked in Darian's chest. Not anger. Not fury. But something closer to grief. He stepped back without a word. Aveline looked up just in time to see the door close. Chapter 14. Lyria returns. The wind that carried Lyria Ashvale back to White Shadow Hollow was sharp and precise, like her. She arrived on a white cloaked stallion, flanked by 2 armored escorts whose sigils shimmered with Ashvale gold. Her cloak swept behind her like the tail of a hunting bird, and the air around her tasted of iron and frost. Darian stood on the stone steps of the council hall, jaw tight. She dismounted without hesitation. Still brooding in the snow, Darian? Her voice, velvet laced with thorns. You're late, he said flatly. I prefer timely. Lyria smiled with the sharp curve of a blade. I heard you've been busy. Battles. Berserkers. And strays. Her gaze slid past him, toward the village outskirts where children chase smoke wolves through falling snow. She saw her then. Across the village green. Aveline. Bent low beneath the eaves of the healer's hut, stringing bones and polished stones into tiny loops, a necklace, perhaps. A child leaned against her hip. A second nestled near her thigh, eyes already fluttering close to the soft rhythm of her humming. Lyria's eyes narrowed. No sigil. No shift. No wolf. Yet the pups flocked to her like birds to warmth. Who is she? Lyria asked, though the edge of her tone said she already knew. Darian said nothing. Inside the council hall, the fire crackled. Elder Main's shadow loomed long against the wall as Lyria stepped in beside Darian, her furs untouched by melt. She stood tall, unbothered by the heat or the judgmental silence of the gathered elders. I have returned to discuss our alliance, she announced. And to offer a union. Main raised a brow. A proposal? To Darian Vexley, Lyria said. It is past time the Vexley line anchored itself with proper blood. A nod from Main. A glimmer of approval in his hollowed eyes. A war-born pairing. The old clans will rejoice. Darian remained still. I never agreed. You never refused, Lyria interrupted sweetly. Then she turned to Main. Though I see the hollow has gathered pets since I left. She didn't say Aveline's name, but her voice dripped with disdain. Main chuckled darkly. The child softens beasts with lullabies. A gift, perhaps, but one that confuses the balance of instinct. Then it's a flaw, Lyria said, turning toward the fire. This is no place for sentiment. Not while the riftwood stirs. She pulled a scroll from her satchel, ancient vellum, ink faded with age, and handed it to Main in secret. Later, alone, he would unroll it to find the words, "The Soother's blood sings to the wolf god's bones." That night, the snow fell quietly, blanketing the world in hush. On the village edge, Aveline sat in the soft, crunching frost, her fingers gently knotting bone fragments into braided sinew. Around her, a small pack of sickly pups curled together, breathing softly, lulled by the rise and fall of her voice. She sang to them as she worked. Little moon-cloaked dreamer. Bones unshaped by war. Sleep beneath the silver sky. I'll guard your heart once more. A small paw touched her knee. She didn't look up. Her fingers moved slowly, tenderly, as if the song guided her hands. And in the shadows beyond the frost line, Darian watched. He hadn't meant to come this close. Had only planned to pass by the border on a midnight patrol. But he couldn't stay away from the sound of her voice. Or the sight of her soft defiance. The way she knelt in the snow, no fur, no weapon, only warmth. And the wolves still came to her. As if she belonged. His voice was low when he finally spoke. You never stop. Aveline didn't startle. She tied the last knot and placed the necklace around the smallest pup's neck. Its fur shimmered faintly beneath the moonlight, almost glowing. "I can't afford to," she said. "Why?" he asked. She looked up then. Her eyes were tired, but not defeated. "Because they need me more than I need to be understood." Darian inhaled slowly. That answer, so simple, so selfless, cut through the layers of stone he'd buried himself beneath. He crouched beside her. Snow melted against the heat between them. "They think you're weak," he said, voice raw. "You keep proving them wrong." "I'm not trying to prove anything," she whispered. "I'm just trying not to be afraid." He looked at her then, truly looked. The curve of her jaw. The faint tremble in her fingers. The quiet kind of bravery that didn't roar, only endured. Aveline turned back to the pups. "Do you need anything, Alpha?" The title tasted wrong between them. Darian didn't answer. But when he left, his footsteps were slower. As if he hated walking away. Lyria stood at the edge of the trees, arms crossed over her chest, watching him vanish into the dark. She'd seen enough. And she knew now. Aveline Rowan wasn't a mistake. She was a threat. Later that night, in a locked chamber beneath the Ashvale estate, Lyria opened the ancient tome once more. Her eyes scanned the faded lines until they landed on a symbol, a crescent moon woven with song lines and blood. "The Soother's blood can awaken the wolf god's bones." Her lips curled into a slow, cold smile. "So it's true." She closed the book, eyes glittering. "It won't be enough to discredit her," she murmured. "We'll have to bleed it out." Chapter 15, The Third Calling. The moonlit arena had been silent for years. Carved deep into the ancient bedrock just beyond the borders of White Shadow Hollow, the arena bore the weight of royal tradition, blood rites, ascensions, and deaths that paved the way for Alpha rule. Moonstone columns encircled the open ring, now frosted with silver dust. At its heart, the sigil of the Vexley line, cracked and ancient, etched in crimson black basalt. Tonight, it would awaken again. Tonight, the wolf within Darian Vexley would rise, or consume him. The crowd stood in tight formation around the ring, cloaks drawn, breath visible in the biting cold. Council elders lined the northern arc, warriors lined the south. Even the faint-hearted had come. Rumors of the Alpha heir's curse had spread like wildfire after the last skirmish. Now they gathered to witness the test no Vexley could avoid. And Darian stood alone at the center. Bare-chested beneath the moonlight, he faced the arena floor, fists clenched. His breathing had slowed, but the tremors beneath his skin betrayed him. His blood was boiling. The madness stirred. A ritual blade, a thin crescent of obsidian, glinted in his palm. He ran it slowly across the center of his chest. The crowd inhaled in unison. Red dripped to the cracked sigil. And the howling began. Somewhere near the rear of the gathered crowd, Aveline clutched her shawl tighter. She shouldn't have come. Mistress Elwyn had warned her. Tobrin had pleaded. Even Mira, the healer, had whispered, "Your gift is not for show." But Aveline felt the pull. Something deep in her marrow, the same aching force that had drawn her toward the berserker wolves, toward the sick pups, toward the cursed Alpha himself, called her here tonight. So she watched. Watched as Darian dropped to one knee, panting. Watched as the black veins beneath his skin pulsed and split. Watched as the shift took him. It was not like other transformations. Most wolves bled into fur. Most howls came mid-shift, half bone, half beast. But Darian ripped. The sound was not of man changing to wolf, it was of a soul shattering to contain something too large, too wild, too old. For exploded from his spine, dark as a raven's wing. His jaw cracked wide, fangs glinting under the rising moon. The sigil beneath him ignited in ghostly red light. The wolf he became was monstrous, twice the size of any beta. Eyes, molten gold. Claws, obsidian. And for a breathless moment, the hollow was silent. Then the roaring began. "Get back," someone screamed. The crowd shattered, scattering like dry leaves. Elders bolted. Even seasoned warriors stumbled backward, blades drawn but useless. Tobrin shouted orders that no one heard. The ceremonial guards turned on each other in confusion. And in the chaos, Darian, beast and blood, howled. It echoed through the stone. It cracked the air. And it pierced Aveline's chest like a blade of winter. She didn't think. She ran. Through the ring of guards. Through the clouds of dust and snow. Into the arena. Into the madness. Aveline no. Tobrin's voice split the air behind her. But the world narrowed to heartbeat and breath. To stone and fur and the monster in the center of the ring. Darian snarled, froth at his jaws, eyes blind with ancestral rage. She stepped closer. Another snarl. Closer still. And then music. Aveline didn't scream. She sang. Her voice, fragile as snowfall, threaded into the night. Flesh is fire and bone may break. But love remembers what rage forsakes. O silver-bound, O moon-born wild. Hush the hunger, be still, be mild. Her voice trembled, but it did not break. The great wolf shuddered. His breath came in ragged bursts, snarling jaws drooping, steps unsteady. Come back to me, not beast, but man. Not fong, but hand, not war, but land. Aveline stepped closer. Her fingers reached for his fur. The others screamed again. Someone reached for a bow. But Darian didn't strike. He stilled. Aveline pressed her lips to his furred brow, right between his wild, twitching ears, and whispered, Darian, come back. The glow erupted. From the sigil. From the wolf god totem behind the arena. From Aveline herself. A silver ring burst from her chest like moonlight unleashed. It expanded across the arena floor, brushing every soul with warmth and awe. And then, the great wolf crumpled. Silence. Then gasps. The beast was gone. In his place, Darian's human form lay, half naked and bloodied, breath shallow but alive. Aveline crumpled beside him, her strength gone. She fell to her knees, then to her side, reaching toward him with one last, trembling breath. Fingers just barely brushing his. And then everything went dark. Neither of them rose. Not for many hours. But the hollow would remember. Not the madness. Not the blood. But the girl who walked into the beast's jaws with a lullaby. And tamed a king. Chapter 16. The Alpha Kneels. Snow had fallen in the night. Not the brutal, lashing kind that came with war cries and wolf howls, but the soft kind, gentle as breath. The kind that buried old footprints. The kind that silenced even the gods. Inside the small stone healing hut, the fire crackled low, barely warm enough to fight the chill bleeding through the mortar. Aveline sat by the water basin, sleeves rolled, fingers immersed in a shallow bowl of melted snow. Her pale hands trembled in the cold. She wasn't washing blood. She was trying to wash away fear. The ringing in her ears hadn't stopped since the moonlit arena. A steady, high-pitched tone, as if her bones still vibrated with moonlight. The price of touching something ancient. The price of reaching too far into the storm. And yet, she would have done it again. 1,000 times. Outside, the village stirred. Word had spread like wildfire of the girl who calmed the Alpha, who stopped the royal blood rage with nothing but a song and a kiss to the beast's brow. The villagers were split. Some whispered reverence, calling her moon-touched, gifted, not of this world. Others, especially the old blood loyalists, hissed words like dangerous, witch-born, unnatural. But no one dared speak too loud. Not today. Because today, he would rise. At midday, the bells rang. Not funeral bells. Not war alarms. But the deep, bone-chiming toll of a summon. White Shadow Hollow's central grounds had not been this full in decades. Every wolf, every villager, every wary council elder stood gathered, breath clouding in the cold, eyes fixed on the long stone steps of the dais. Then a shadow moved behind the great ceremonial doors. And Darian Vexley emerged. He wore no armor, only a black linen tunic and deep crimson cloak, still frayed from the shift. His raven hair hung loose, his golden eyes duller than usual, rimmed with exhaustion and something unspoken. Still, his presence gripped the crowd like a tightening chain. Tobrin stood behind him, silent as a sentinel. Darian didn't speak right away. He descended the steps with slow, heavy purpose, and stopped at the bottom, turning not to the council, but to her. Aveline stood near the back, hood up, as if trying to shrink beneath it. She hadn't expected to be summoned, she hadn't expected to be seen. But he found her. And to the stunned silence of the pack, Darian Vexley, the alpha heir, born of fire and blood, dropped to one knee before her. And bowed his head. "I owe you my life." His voice was hoarse, low, but carried through the crowd like a drumbeat. "You walked into death's mouth for me. You risked yourself for something I couldn't control. You saved me when I became something I feared more than death itself." He lifted his head slowly, eyes finding hers. "I knelt only once before. At my father's coronation. I do so again now for you." The crowd inhaled. A few gasped. One elder visibly stiffened. Even Tobrin looked momentarily stunned. Aveline felt her knees buckle, the world swaying. Too much light, too much seeing. She did not speak. She simply stepped forward, gently touched his shoulder, then turned and walked away. Back inside the healing hut, the silence was deafening. Her fingers once more found the cold water. This time, she didn't scrub. She just stared at her reflection, distorted, soft, trembling. The water trembled with her. Later, Tobrin found Darian by the ridge overlooking the hollow, where the pines stretched like claws toward the gray sky. "She hasn't spoken much," he said quietly. "She doesn't need to," Darian murmured, eyes distant. A beat of wind passed. Tobrin exhaled, then handed Darian a small linen pouch. Inside, wrapped in wool, was a single shard of moonstone. "Someone found this beneath the totem after the shift," Tobrin said. "Said it glowed when she sang. Said it cracked when she fell." Darian didn't speak. "You still think she's weak?" Tobrin asked, tone sharp but calm. "She walked into your madness with nothing but a song. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She stood between you and the grave and called you home." Darian's jaw tensed. "She gave everything," Tobrin pressed, stepping forward, voice low now. "Her body, her mind, her gift. For you. And you call her a burden." "I never called her a burden." "No," Tobrin replied, quiet fury under his breath, "but you made her feel like one." That night, Aveline couldn't sleep. The ringing had faded into a dull throb. But now she couldn't stop replaying the image, Darian on his knees. Not broken, not bowed by blood, but in choice. In thanks. No one had ever knelt for her. No one had seen her as something worthy of reverence. And it terrified her more than anything. Elsewhere, under a dead pine, an old hunter scribbled notes into a leather-bound journal. He'd seen the glow from the ridge, the totem shine, the silver ripple when her voice rose. He flipped the page to an old, half-forgotten sketch, a woman bathed in light, surrounded by sleeping wolves. Beneath it, the moon's breath, the Soother reborn, the one who calms the god. He circled it once, twice, then smiled to himself. She lives. Chapter 17, The Council's Decree. The Hall of Teeth, as the old wolves called it, had never felt colder. Stone walls lined with jagged bone, torches flickering with violet salt fire, the scent of ash and frost biting at the lungs. Here, where war cries once echoed, the council gathered beneath the carved sigil of the first howl, an ancient wolf, maw open to the moon. And before them stood Aveline. Her pale hands were folded in front of her, spine straight, chin lifted with quiet defiance. She wore no cloak, no armor, only the threadbare gray shawl stitched by borderland hands, its edges still frayed from the storm. A girl among titans. A whisper among war drums. And yet, she did not tremble. She didn't need to. The air trembled for her. At the head of the dais, Elder Maine stepped forward. His voice rang through the chamber like a blade scraping marble. You have heard the rumors. You have seen the signs. The alpha heir, Darian Vexley, lost control during his blood rite. He did not fall to madness. He did not perish. He was calmed. By her. Murmurs stirred like wind among dry leaves. A few counselors exchanged wary glances. Others' eyes sharpened with fear. We know of Soothers. Their songs. Their influence. Maine continued, circling Aveline like a crow eyeing a dying lamb. But this girl, has gone beyond her station. She has manipulated the Alpha's blood. She has altered a sacred trial. He turned sharply, robe swirling. This is a threat to tradition. To strength. To truth. A pause. Then, I call for a formal trial. And expulsion. The hall fell silent. Aveline's breath caught. But she did not cry out. She did not plead. She simply turned to the crowd, voice soft, steady, and laced with that quiet ache of someone used to being discarded. If I stay, you will turn against one another, she said. Some of you will defend me. Others will brand me cursed. But she looked up, silver eyes catching the torchlight like moonlight on ice. I will not be the reason your pack breaks. She inhaled, slow. So I will go. A wave of protest surged before anyone could contain it. Even some counselors blinked in shock. Toberon stepped forward, but halted himself. And then, a voice like thunder rolled through the chamber. No, Darian. His boots struck the stone as he strode down the aisle like a storm given form. Shoulders broad, jaw set, that commanding silence around him thick as a mountain. He did not stop beside the elders. He stood beside her. She saved my life. She saved yours, he growled, eyes burning into Maine's skull. Would you rather have me dead? Would that have preserved your precious laws? She altered the bond. No. She healed what blood alone could not. And you hate her for it. His voice rose. She is not weak. She is not a threat. She is the reason I still stand. Another pause. A heartbeat of stunned quiet. Then he turned to Aveline. Just her. And I will not let you go alone. But she shook her head. And gods, it broke something in him. You are bound by duty, she whispered, so low only he could hear. And I am bound by mercy. You cannot carry both. He wanted to fight. His fists clenched, jaw flexed. But she stepped back. And gave him the gentlest smile he'd ever seen. Let me be the one who walks away, so that you can stay. By nightfall, the hollow knew. The girl was leaving. She did not pack much, only a satchel, her needles, a single worn cloak, and a vial of river salt gifted by one of the children. No one stopped her. No one dared. But from the ridge above the trees, Darian watched her go, wind whipping through his hair, something brittle cracking inside his chest. Toberon came to stand beside him. You let her walk away, Toberon said. She chose to. She shouldn't have had to. Silence. Then Toberon's voice, low, sharp with truth. You're afraid of what she makes you feel. You always have been. Darian didn't reply. Because it was true. Far below, in the forest's edge, Aveline looked back once. The wind whispered against her cheek. Don't come after me, she murmured into the trees, knowing he wouldn't hear. Not until you're free. She turned toward the mountains. And disappeared into the snow. Interlude, after the trial. In a candlelit chamber, deep in the heart of the council's wing, Elder Maine stood before a figure cloaked in indigo. Lyria Ashvale. She's gone, Maine said. But not broken. Lyria smirked. You underestimate pain, she said. Exile leaves scars deeper than any blade. We must move quickly. If the old blood awakens in her. It already has, she cut in, throwing a worn scroll onto the stone table. Ancient script. The symbol of the moon god etched in silver ink. She is more than a soother, Lyria whispered. She is the vessel. Maine's eyes darkened. Then the Warborn protocol must begin. At once. Chapter 18, A Hidden Song. The snow whispered in a language only the exiled understood. Aveline's boots sank with a soft crunch into the powder-blanketed trail. The deeper she wandered into the northern glade, the quieter the world became. Pines leaned close, their limbs heavy with ice. A wolf's howl echoed in the distance, not a warning, not a threat. A greeting. And yet, she did not answer. She had no pack to answer with. Ahead, nestled between two jutting cliffs, a cave mouth yawned wide like the throat of some ancient beast, its breath lost to time. Black stone ridges curled around the entrance like claws. Snow rimmed the edges, undisturbed. No one had stepped here in years. Perfect. Her breath rose in a fragile plume as she entered. Stone closed behind her like the pages of an unread book. Inside, the silence pressed closer. Here, in the untouched dark, Aveline finally exhaled. She lit a small flame with flint and dry twigs. It caught slow, spitting cinders toward the low ceiling. The walls shimmered faintly, veins of silver or gleaming like buried stars. She laid her things down on a flat slab of stone, unrolled her shawl, removed her gloves with trembling fingers. Alone. Again. But this time, she had chosen it. Or so she told herself. The dream. It came on the third night. Snow hissed outside like voices too old to understand. Her body, wrapped in furs, lay still, but her mind wandered deeper than sleep. She stood in the moonlit arena again. But it was empty. The torches gone cold. No pack. No eyes. Just the wolf totem, massive and cracked, looming at the center, its eyes carved deep into the rock, weeping shadow instead of light. And then, a voice, low as thunder and soft as breath. Child of stillness. You are not the silence. You are the song that calms it. Only you can temper the red moon's hunger. Aveline turned toward the sound, heart hammering, but the arena dissolved into wind and snow and stars. She woke gasping. Sweat clung to her neck despite the cold. The next morning, she wandered deeper into the cave. Toward a place where the air grew warmer, oddly, thicker. The cave narrowed, then opened into a dome-like hollow. In its center, a pool of water shimmered, not from sunlight, but from something beneath. Pale blue light pulsed within its depths like a heartbeat. Aveline dropped to her knees. And for a long while, she just listened. No wind. No footsteps. No command. Only her own breath. And something deep within her chest, answering that pulsing glow. Garrick. He arrived at dusk. His shadow broke across the cave mouth like a split tree. Broad-shouldered, fur-lined cloak dusted in frost, a hunter's axe strapped to his back. Garrick. Old. Scarred. And for years, thought to be half mad from his time beyond the Riftwood. But now he knelt at the edge of her fire like a pilgrim. I tracked you here, he said simply. Aveline looked up, unsmiling. Why? Garrick studied her. The long fingers wrapped around a bone pendant she'd been weaving. The bruises beneath her eyes. The stubborn, defiant calm. Because you're not just a girl who sings to wolves, he said, reaching into his satchel. You're something older. He handed her a stone. Flat. Circular. Faint symbols carved in weather-worn lines. One of them, crescent nested inside a spiral, glowed faintly in her hand. She felt it before she saw it. A pulse. Like recognition. It resonated the night you calmed Vexley, Garrick murmured. Lit like frost fire. I found it buried beneath the arena. You tell me what it means. Aveline stared at the stone. She remembered the voice in her dream. The word it used. Stillness, she whispered. Calm. The ancients called them Munseers. Or Soothers, depending which clan survived long enough to name them. Garrick's voice lowered. But they all agreed on one thing. When the red moon returns, it will be her voice that quiets the tide. Aveline gripped the pendant tighter. No, she said. That can't be me. And yet you're here, Garrick said. Alive. After calming a berserker heir. After defying the council. Silence stretched between them. Then Aveline looked toward the far end of the cave, where the light from the pool reflected against the walls like rippling silver. I don't want to be chosen, she whispered. Garrick gave a slow nod. No one worth it ever does. That night, the snow fell harder. And inside the cave, Aveline found herself sitting beside a shivering pup. One of the orphaned runts from the hollow must have tracked her. It was all ribs and frostbitten paws, curled against her pack for warmth. She didn't ask how it got there. She simply wrapped it in furs, held it close, and began to sing. Crescent moon. Hush now, little breath of frost. Night has teeth, but none to bite. Moon above and heart below. Carry dreams on silent snow. Crescent moon. Her voice was raw at first, then steady. The kind of sound that didn't fill a space, but held it. The pup shuddered, whimpered once, then stilled. As it fell asleep, Aveline tucked the final bone pendant, small, shaped like a crescent claw, around its neck. One last thread. One last gift. She stepped outside. Beneath a sky of stars and snowfall, she knelt, dug into the frozen ground with her bare hands, and buried the final piece of her torn borderland cloak. Ash gray and faded. All that was left of the girl who once begged to be noticed. And as she pressed her palm to the snow-covered earth, she whispered, "I don't want to run anymore." High above the cave, Garrick watched her from a ledge. His eyes narrowed at the stone in his palm. The same sigil glowed faintly. And deeper in the rock wall behind him, etched and nearly erased by time, a faint carving pulsed in rhythm with Aveline's breath. A wolf's eye, surrounded by a spiral of stars. Chapter 19. The Oath of Tobrin. The snow-whispered promises only fools believed. Tobrin knew better. He moved like shadow between the trees, bootprints muffled in the drifts, the faint scent of ash and sage guiding him toward the heart of the northern woods. The silence was sacred here, too cold for birdsong, too distant for war cries. Only the wind spoke, and it said, "She is near." And she was. He had known it even before he'd seen the tufts of silver thread snagged on a branch. Her scent lingered faintly in the air, wolf leaf, rain, and something quieter. Something like hope. He found her at dawn, crouched beside the river's edge, cupping water in her hands as if it might rinse away more than blood. Her back was turned. Still, she knew. "You followed me," Aveline said softly. Tobrin stepped closer, not bothering to mask his breath this time. "Darian ordered me to bring you back." Her hands stilled. Water slid between her fingers and returned to the stream. "And will you?" she asked, still not turning. He hesitated. Then, "No." That made her rise. She turned to face him, and even through the exhaustion etched beneath her eyes, she glowed. Not like fire. Like moonlight on old scars. "I told the others you died in the storm," he said. "Left blood on a cloak. Enough for the story to breathe." Aveline blinked once. "You lied, for me?" Tobrin took a slow step forward, then another, until only frost-laced air separated them. "I did what I had to do. I won't let them twist your strength into something dangerous. They don't deserve the pieces of you they can't understand." Her eyes searched his. "And what if I am dangerous, Tobrin?" "Then I'll stand behind you anyway," he whispered. He reached into the folds of his cloak and pulled something from the leather pouch at his chest, a small blade, hilt wrapped in worn wolfhide. Without breaking her gaze, he knelt, pressed the blade's tip to his palm, and sliced a clean red line across his skin. "I vow this in blood," he said, voice rough with devotion, "that as long as I breathe, I'll follow you. Not as your keeper, not as your commander, but as your shield." Snow fell silently around them. Aveline's voice came like a breath stolen from a dream. "Tobrin." He lifted his eyes to hers, and something fierce and unguarded flickered there. "You don't owe me this," she said, stepping close. "I don't want your loyalty if it costs you everything. You didn't ask for it." His voice was quiet thunder. "That's why it's real." Aveline's hand trembled slightly as she reached into her satchel and drew out a pendant, a tiny carved bone threaded with dark sinew, shaped into the curve of a half-moon fong. She pressed it into his bleeding palm, smearing the blood between them. "Then take this. As thanks. Not for your vow, but for your truth." He looked down at the pendant. Something in it throbbed faintly in the moonlight, so softly it could have been imagined. but Tobrin knew enough to recognize the pulse of something more. He bowed his head, not as soldier, but as man. Later that night, Darian found him at the edge of the hollow. His alpha's eyes were darker than the storm clouds gathering above. Wind howled through the frost-laced trees, and the world itself seemed to hold its breath. She's alive. Not a question. A fury. Tobrin stood taller. Yes. Darian's jaw clenched. You disobeyed a direct command. I protected her. By lying to your alpha? By saving the only thing that still holds you to this world. That struck deeper than any blade. Darian's breath ghosted visibly in the cold. He turned his face away, but not before Tobrin caught the storm behind those amber eyes. You don't get to choose mercy when it's convenient, Tobrin said, voice low. She gave everything to save you. Again. And you let the council tear her down because it was easier than facing what you feel. Darian's fists tightened. You think I don't feel it? A pause. Then, quieter. You think I wanted this? He looked away, into the snow-draped clearing where once, years ago, his older brother had turned under the red moon's madness, where his mother had stood between them, and where blood had spilled so hot it melted frost. Darian closed his eyes. I saw what love does, he said, voice gravel and regret. How it blinds you. How it weakens your guard just enough for fate to strike. Aveline is not your mother, Tobrin said gently. And you are not your brother. Darian didn't answer. Couldn't. The snow answered for him. Elsewhere, beneath a sky thick with stars and distance, Aveline walked alone again. But this time, she was not lonely. She carried nothing but her breath, and the song nestled in her throat, warm and half-formed. The trees whispered. The stars pulsed in rhythm. And far behind her, unseen, Tobrin stood watch from the shadows. Not to protect her, but to honor the space she'd claimed with her pain. Chapter 20, The Storm Brews. The wind clawed at the windows of White Shadow Hollow, howling with a voice that seemed more spirit than storm. Inside the mountain's bowels, beneath stone and blood and 1,000 years of silence, a door groaned open. The corridor beyond breathed with rot. Torchlight sputtered against the damp walls of the underground chamber. The air smelled of iron and smoke and something older. Something wrong. Darian Vexley stepped into the experimental vault with his father's voice still echoing behind his eyes. The blood-fire protocol was never abandoned, Lord Vexley had said with his usual steel. Only paused. War is coming, my son. And we must be ready. Darian had tried to speak sense, tried to remind him that the last attempt had ended in uncontrollable rage, in lives torn apart by their own bodies. You're building monsters, he'd said. I'm refining weapons, came the reply. And now, as Darian passed the first cell, where a hunched figure curled against the wall, eyes glowing faintly red in the dark, he felt cold down to the marrow. Chains rattled faintly. A snarl scraped the silence. He hated this place. The walls, the screams, the truth. He was made here. And now his father would make more. Elsewhere, in the frost-thick wilds of the hollow's edge, Aveline had heard whispers. In taverns. From frightened mothers who noticed missing children. From dying scouts whose wounds hadn't come from wild beasts, but something made. So she followed the rumors. She moved through trees slick with frost, breath ghosting before her lips. She wore her quiet like armor, every footstep deliberate. The woods opened into a sharp dip in the land, what once might have been a collapsed mine or ritual trench, now overgrown with ice-heavy vines. She crouched, fingers brushing something half-buried. Claw marks. But not from any natural wolf. They were too long. Too twisted. She should have turned back. But then she heard it. A whimper. Thin. Desperate. From within the brush. Aveline dove forward, parting the brittle branches, and saw a pup. No older than a few moons, trembling, foam-dried at the corner of its mouth. One eye was violet, the other, glowing faint gold. Not natural. Not right. Her heart clenched. It whimpered again, barely able to move. Without hesitation, she shrugged off her cloak, wrapped the little thing in it, and cradled it to her chest. "I've got you," she murmured. "I've got you now." And just as she rose to leave, a hand caught her wrist. Back in the hollow, by the hidden path to the vault. "Are you mad?" Darian's voice was sharp as ice. Aveline froze, breath catching in her throat. The pup stirred beneath her cloak, but did not cry. "You shouldn't be here," he hissed. She turned slowly to face him. He looked like thunder incarnate, hair damp from snow, cloak slung carelessly, hands clenched as if resisting the urge to shake sense into her. But his eyes, those gold and ash eyes, betrayed something else. Fear. "I came because someone has to," she said softly. "I've seen what's happening. They're making berserkers again." His jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're getting involved in." "Then tell me." She stepped closer. "Let me understand." Her closeness threw him off. Her voice, the one that had once soothed his madness, was soft now, but unshaken. She smelled like cold air and quiet defiance. He reached for her before he could stop himself. His fingers wrapped around her wrist, warm against her chilled skin. She didn't flinch. "You can't fix this," he said, voice rougher. "This storm is older than you. Older than both of us." Aveline looked down at his hand, then slowly met his gaze again. "You once said I didn't understand your darkness," she whispered. "Maybe that's true. But I'm not afraid of it anymore." A pause. Then he pulled her closer. Not forcefully, but like a man whose control was hanging by a thread. His forehead brushed hers, barely there, as if proximity itself might burn. "You shouldn't be near me," he whispered, voice breaking. "Then let go," she replied, steady. He didn't. Later. They stood near the threshold of the sealed chamber, the little pup resting against Aveline's chest. Its breath had steadied, though the strange flicker in its eyes still danced like torchlight. Darian watched her as if memorizing the curve of her lashes in the dim. "That thing," he nodded at the bundle, "shouldn't be alive. It's a failed experiment." "Then maybe it's the first to be saved," she said. A pause. And then he reached for her hand again. But this time slower. Careful. Fingers brushing hers, curling inward like a promise unspoken. "Don't do this alone," he said. "I never was," she replied. Elsewhere, in a darker room, deeper beneath the hollow, Elder Maine stood beside Lord Vexley, eyes fixed on a pulsating rune etched into the vault's core altar. "Her blood sings to this place," Maine muttered. "The girl?" Lord Vexley asked, brows drawn. Maine smiled, sharp as a blade. "She's more than Soother. She's the key." The rune pulsed again, this time in the shape of a crescent fong. Chapter 21. Blood and Silence. The Moonlight Temple had no doors, only a threshold carved from time. Jagged rock teeth arched above ancient stone steps, moss-draped and bone-cold underfoot. Inside, silence reigned. Not the absence of sound, but the thick, pulsing kind that lived in places where gods once walked. It was here, beneath the temple's vaulted ceiling etched with lunar runes, that the storm of judgment gathered. And Aveline stood at its center. Pale, unmoving. A flicker of breath in a chamber meant for fire and wrath. At the dais, Elder Maine raised a gnarled hand. "She is not wolf. She is not pack. And yet she dares touch alpha blood, dares twist his fate with her unnatural calm." Gasps rippled through the gathered wolves. Dozens circled the sacred chamber, warriors, elders, lowbloods, each watching with breathless tension. And at Maine's side, a predator smiled. Lyria Ashvale. She stepped forward, golden hair gleaming like a blade drawn under moonlight. Her voice was clear, cold. "We have proof she bears the blood of the old ones, those who called themselves gods and defied the moon. That blood is forbidden. It stains this sanctuary." She pointed at Aveline. "She is a desecration." For a moment, no one moved. Then, Lyria placed her palm upon the altar stone. And the temple shuddered. Moonfire erupted across the walls, lines of light tracing ancient sigils, half-forgotten runes that hadn't stirred in centuries. The torches hissed out, swallowed by a deeper illumination. Lyria cried out and staggered back, clutching her head. What is this? She collapsed to the floor. A silence descended again. Then softly, almost too softly to hear. She is not the desecration. The voice echoed from the walls. It did not belong to any wolf. It was older. It was the moon itself. All eyes turned to Aveline. Her hands were at her sides. Her head bowed, silver hair loose and damp with sweat. She did not speak at first. Then she stepped forward, barefoot, unwavering. The light did not burn her. It kissed her skin. She fell to her knees before the altar, laid her palms upon the stone that had seared Lyria's, and whispered, "If I am of you, if this blood is yours, then let me protect them. Let me be your voice. Let me be your peace." The temple answered. A glow bloomed beneath her fingers, subtle, soft, but impossibly pure. The air thickened, every breath laced with a hum like heartbeat and tide. And behind her, boots struck stone. Heavy. Urgent. Darian Vexley. He came like the storm outside, wind wild and half feral, his coat flaring behind him, eyes burning. He saw Aveline at the altar. He saw the light. And something inside him broke. "Enough," he growled. He placed himself between her and Maine, between her and every gaze that had sought to tear her down. He stood tall, chest heaving, voice shaking not with fear, but with fury. "She's not a threat. She's our only hope." Maine's mouth twisted. "She manipulates you. You've always been weak." Darian snapped. "You want weakness? Try standing where she stands, with nothing but faith." He turned to the crowd. "She calmed the madness in me when no blood right could. She saved Tobrin. She saved the Hollow." His gaze swept the room. "And she asked for nothing." Aveline rose behind him. Her hand brushed the back of his arm, just once. It steadied him more than any weapon. He turned to her then. Their eyes met. Something old passed between them. Something inevitable. Not possession. Not hunger. Recognition. Later. The temple had emptied. Only torchlight remained, flickering over the stone where Aveline still knelt. Darian stayed beside her, silent for a long time. Watching. Finally, he spoke. "When I was a boy," he said quietly, "I used to come here during storms. I thought the moon could keep me from becoming like my brother." Aveline looked up. He wasn't looking at her, he was looking past the altar, into memory. "But the moon never answered," he said. "It did tonight," she whispered. He turned his gaze to her. Rough fingers touched her cheek, knuckles grazing the line of her jaw. "And it chose you." Aveline didn't flinch from his touch. But her voice was fragile. "That makes you angry?" His breath hitched. "No," he said. "It makes me want to believe." She leaned into him, just enough. And beneath the high dome of the sacred temple, in the hush after fire and revelation, Darian pressed his forehead to hers. There was no kiss. Not yet. Just silence. And a promise. Elsewhere, hidden in the shadows of the outer sanctum, Elder Maines stood in the cold corridor beyond the chamber, face cloaked in moonlight. Beside him, Lord Vexley leaned on his cane. "Did you see the sigils?" Maine murmured. "I saw." "Then you understand what's coming." Vexley's voice was like ash. "The red moon will rise. And only pure blood can command the storm." Maine's lips curled. "Then let her bleed for it." Chapter 22, The Battle of Wills. Snow lashed the stone walls of the Vexley Keep as if the moon herself raged. Within the council hall, firelight flickered like war banners, casting red gold over polished bone and blood-etched tapestries. The room reeked of iron and dominance, every inch shaped by Lord Vexley's rule. Wolves lined the high seats in silence, but tension coiled in their spines, visible even in stillness. Darian stood at the base of the dais, posture iron straight, his amber eyes lit not with obedience, but defiance. "The Bloodfire Protocol ends tonight." His voice rang through the hall like a blade drawn slow and clean. His father, High Alpha Vexley, reclined in his stone throne, worn leather cloak draped over massive shoulders, silver-streaked hair tied back like a soldier going to war. "You forget your place," he growled. No, Darian said, stepping forward. I finally understand it. My place is not behind your throne, not beneath your orders. It's beside the wolves who still have souls to lose. Maine's shadow moved beside the alpha, robes whispering. We need the warborn. The red moon draws near. Darian's lip curled. And so you'd twist pups into monsters before they even know what mercy is? The elder scoffed. Mercy won't protect us. Neither will madness, Darian snapped. A beat of silence. Then Vexley stood. Towering. Cold. His voice quiet, terrible. Then you are no son of mine. No gasp followed. Only the sound of Darian's breath as he straightened, eyes flashing. Then I finally know who I am. He turned his back on the throne. And didn't flinch when the doors slammed shut behind him. Snowfall on the ridge. The forest opened to him like a wound, white and wide and seething with wind. Darian's boots broke through layers of ice as he strode into the wilds, toward the scattered camps that had become a new kind of haven. Beneath a canopy of frost-kissed pines, wolves gathered, not in ranks, but in circles. Free wolves. The outcast. The loyal. The ones who had seen Aveline risk herself not for glory, but for them. Darian called them Moonshadow. They came not because he commanded, but because they believed. In her. And now, in him. He found Tobrin first, kneeling over a wounded scout near the fire. He won't survive another push, the beta muttered, bloodied fingers pressed to the young wolf's shoulder. Darian crouched beside them, gaze flicking to the dark horizon. Then we make no more pushes. Tobrin looked up, brow drawn. You mean to stay? I mean to fight a different war. The beta's jaw tightened, but a flicker of something passed through his eyes. Hope. She sang to the broken. The camp was quiet save for the soft crunch of snow and the rasp of wind through cloth. In a small hollow carved into the side of the ridge, Aveline knelt beside 3 young wolves curled beneath firs. Her voice, hushed and lilting, wound through the trees like thread through a wound. Close your eyes, my wildling kin. Where snow forgets the roar of sin. Let silver hush your blood-stirred flame. You're more than Fong, you're more than name, __. The pups stilled, chests rising and falling beneath her hands. Her song lingered like mist weaving peace. And Darian watched, unseen, for several long heartbeats. She wore no armor, only a cloak stitched from scavenged hides and scraps. But she looked stronger than she ever had in silks or moonlit gowns. The snow touched her cheeks, but didn't melt. She wasn't warmth now. She was purpose. He approached slowly, boots muffled by pine needles. Aveline looked up. He stopped a step away. You heard, she whispered. He nodded. They'll come for you next, she said. For all of you. Then they'll find we don't kneel. He looked down at her hand. So small. So unyielding. Slowly, he offered his. Not as Alpha. As Darian. You make me believe, he said. That strength isn't just in rage. Or war. Or blood. Then believe harder, she said with a tired smile. We're going to need it. Their fingers met. And he held on. Not for dominance. For anchor. Later that night, the fire burned low in the center of the Moonshadow camp. Above, the stars bled silver and the wind carried a stillness that felt like waiting. Aveline sat alone on the ridge, watching the breath of wolves rise in soft clouds below. Darian joined her, silent at first. Do you ever miss it? He asked eventually. Before all this? She thought. Then shook her head. Back then, I wanted to belong. Now, I want to protect. He turned to her. The look in his eyes was no longer guarded. It was open, terrifying in its honesty. You are our future, Aveline. Her breath hitched. Not from doubt. But because it was the first time someone said it like a truth, not a burden. Meanwhile, in the depths of Stofong Hold, shadows flickered against the council chamber walls. Maine stood beside the high alpha, voice low and venomous. They follow her now. Vexley's eyes were knives. Then we remind them who holds the chain. Maine nodded. The red moon rises. When it does, the blood madness will return. The alpha's smile was razor-thin, and only pure blood can bind it. He turned toward a wall of old runes. In the center, Aveline's bloodline symbol pulsed faintly. She thinks she's their piece. He touched the stone. She'll be our weapon. Chapter 23, A Pack Without Chains. The trees had learned to hush when she walked through them. In the heart of the forest, where the moonlight bled silver onto frost-laced leaves, Soother's grove breathed a rare, sacred stillness. Pines rose like sentinels, ancient and watching, and the snow beneath their roots shimmered with a quiet kind of reverence. Here, the madness of blood had no voice. Here, they came to remember who they were before the war in their veins began. Aveline stood at the grove's center, cloaked in ash-gray wool and a bone-thread necklace that glowed faintly where it lay against her collarbone. Her hair, pale as a ghost's eye, was braided in a crown around her head. And though her hands trembled with exhaustion, she raised them without fear. Before her, 12 wolves knelt, muscle-bound, scar-slick, their eyes wild with residual rage. Berserker blood pulsed in their veins. But they waited. For her. "Close your eyes," Aveline murmured. And they obeyed. She breathed in the night air. Cold pine, damp moss, the faint metallic tang of snow. Then she began to sing. Underscore, bones may break and blood may roar, but peace lives deeper at the core. Let fury rest beneath the stone. You do not have to stand alone. Underscore. Her voice, soft, almost frail, threaded through the air like falling snow. It wasn't strength in the way wolves were taught to measure it. It was something older, more enduring. And when one of the berserker wolves, bigger than the others, twitching at the edges of control, let out a broken, guttural growl, she did not flinch. Instead, she walked to him, laid a single hand on his shoulder. "You are not your madness," she whispered. His breathing slowed. The others bowed their heads. Among the pines, Darian watched from the edge of the glade. He should have spoken. Should have stepped forward hours ago. But something about the way she stood, barefoot in the snow, raw with courage, made silence feel sacred. She moved like she belonged to the forest. Like the trees leaned in just to listen. It was a terrifying, beautiful thing, seeing someone you once thought fragile stand taller than the tallest warrior. And he felt it again, that pull. Not of instinct. Not of blood. Of choice. He stepped forward as her song ended, crunching snow beneath his boots. She turned, startled for only a moment before her face softened. He offered no words. Only his hand. She blinked at it, then at him. "Darian?" His throat tightened around the truth. "You make me believe," he said hoarsely, "that strength isn't only for those who kill with it." She took his hand. The world didn't shake. But his heart did. The children howled for her. Later, as dusk bruised the snow sky with lavender and charcoal, the youngest wolves gathered around her like moths to flame. Aveline knelt by the fire pit, her hands deft and quick as she tied bits of polished bone onto string. The pups watched with wide, silver-lit eyes. "For each of you," she said, looping a necklace over a small black furred neck, "a piece of the forest to remember what steadies you." One by one, she adorned them. And one by one, they stood straighter. The last pup, a runt with one white paw, tilted his head, then lifted his nose and howled. The others followed. High, clear, unbroken. A sound not of war, but of belonging. The trees stirred. And then, unthinkably, the sky answered. The moonlight pulsed. The necklaces on their necks began to glow faintly, silver threads sparking against bone. The air grew still, heavy, as if something ancient had drawn breath. And at the grove's far edge, half swallowed by ivy, an old totem stone flared with pale fire. Darian stepped closer to her, stunned. "You awakened something." Aveline didn't answer. She only looked down at the glowing pup beside her, its eyes mirrors of the wolf god's symbol, and whispered. "I didn't awaken it." They did. Later that night, they sat by the embers. No words between them. Only shared warmth and the echo of howls that had not been born of violence, but hope. He turned to her slowly. You led them. They followed themselves, she said. No, he corrected. They followed you because you didn't ask them to. The flicker of a smile touched her mouth. Then he did something he had never done. He brushed a stray curl from her face and tucked it behind her ear, gently, almost reverently. You were never a weakness, Aveline. I see that now. The silence that followed was not empty. It pulsed with all the things they had not yet dared to say. But beneath it was trust. Growing. And something sweeter. In the shadows of power. Miles away, inside the cold halls of Snowfong Hold, Lord Vexley leaned over a map dusted with bone ash and strategy. Elder Mayne waited, still as ice. The wolves gather behind her, the alpha growled. She glows when the moon touches her, Mayne said. The totems respond. The forest bends. Then she's more than a girl. The high alpha reached for a glass vial, swirling red inside. She's leverage. Mayne smiled without warmth. The red moon approaches. And only pure blood can command the tide. Chapter 24, The Last Trial. The snowfall came like a hush over the world. Thin and weightless at first, then thicker, heavier, as if the sky itself wished to veil what was about to unfold in the border woods. Aveline moved through the trees alone. The wind curled around her like a warning. Cold. Coiling. Each flake caught in her lashes like frost-kissed secrets. She had learned not to fear silence. But this silence didn't breathe. It waited. And somewhere beneath it, watched. The attack. She sensed them just before they moved. Not by sound, not by scent. By the sudden wrongness of the trees. Then, blurred motion. A flash of shadow. The hiss of a blade slicing air. She twisted. A silver dagger missed her ribs by inches. Another figure crashed down from above, wolf-like armor glinting under the snow-cloud moon. Trained. Silent. Eyes blank as stone. Mayne's doing. Assassins. She ducked, rolled, the world tilting. Her breath came in sharp bursts, white mist in the frozen dark. Her gift was not made for battle. But she would not die without standing her ground. She pressed a palm to the earth. And sang. The rage in you is not your name. The blood you spill won't cleanse the flame. Let shadows fall. Let fury sleep. I call your soul from the silence deep. The first attacker faltered. Just enough. Then came the roar. A flash of obsidian. And Darian was there. Side by side. He hit the ground like thunder, claws half-formed, golden eyes burning. He moved through them like a storm made flesh, cutting, striking, shielding. Touch her again, he snarled, and you will choke on your bones. Aveline barely had time to stand before another assassin lunged for her throat. She caught their wrist mid-strike, her palm trembling against theirs. They were young. Barely older than the pups she'd soothed in the grove. Their arms shook in her grip. And still, she sang. You were a child before the blade. You dreamed before you learned to hate. So breathe now if you can remember. You are more than what they made. The assassin's eyes widened. Glazed steel shifted, just a flicker. They dropped the blade. Collapsed at her feet. The declaration. The other attackers fled into the trees, retreating like smoke. Blood marked the snow in dark strokes, but Aveline knelt beside the fallen one, laying both hands on their chest. Even an enemy, she whispered, should not be left in pain. Silence followed. A stunned, aching silence. Then came a voice, sharp, cracked open with feeling. Enough. Darian stood behind her, chest heaving, blood on his jaw and hands. He turned slowly, facing the watching wolves, those who had crept close at the edge of the glade, drawn by the commotion, uncertain of their allegiance. His voice shook the night. If any hand rises against her again, he said, they rise against me. And I do not forgive. He stepped to her side. Took her hand. She is not our weakness, he said. She is our anchor. Witnessed by snow and fire. Word spread like wildfire in frost. That Aveline Rowan had calmed an assassin with nothing but her voice. That Darian Vexley, alpha heir, Vexley blooded and war-born, had bared his teeth not at her, but for her. That mercy had defeated what violence could not. And still, as the injured assassin was carried off into the night by neutral hands, they spoke. Their voice, weak but sharp with awe. She is the moon's messenger. Later, Darian stood at the edge of the firelight, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. Aveline approached, her fingers still stained faintly red where she'd laid them over wounds. He didn't speak. Not at first. Only looked at her like he'd seen a star fall and somehow survived the crash. You could have been killed. So could you, she murmured. That's not the same. She tilted her head. Why not? He struggled, his body taut, like every answer he might give was a sword he feared she'd walk into. Because I know how to survive pain, he said, low. But if I saw it in your eyes, again, I wouldn't come back from it. The words settled between them like heat beneath ice. Then her hand slid into his. No fanfare. No hesitation. He looked down. You didn't even flinch when I killed for you. And you didn't flinch, she said, when I spared for you. A beat. Then he leaned in, forehead brushing hers, breath mingling, but no kiss yet. Something deeper. I was wrong about strength, he whispered. You've been teaching me in every silence. Chapter 25, Before the Red Moon. The air smelled of ash and endings. Wind howled through the broken bones of the once mighty Stofong hold. The great hall, where bloodlines were forged in steel and law, now lay crumbled, the walls blackened by fire, the banners shredded like old scars. The Bloodfire Protocol had devoured its creators. And the kingdom bled from within. The collapse. They said the howls began at dusk, inhuman, thick with madness. Screams tangled with them like wind through the trees. No warning. No control. The berserkers, crafted, chained, raised in shadowed vaults beneath the hold, had broken free. And when they rose, the walls fell. Lord Vexley had stood at the heart of the storm. Commanding. Unbending. Until the storm turned on him. Now he lay crushed beneath fallen stone, half alive, half shadow. Even then, he refused to beg. We were meant to master the blood, he had whispered to Darian as the healers scraped fire and steel from his body. But we bred only ruin. Darian hadn't answered. He had stared down at the man he'd once feared more than death itself, and found no triumph in his fall. Only grief. And fire. The choice. The council had fractured. The wolves split, some fleeing north into the cold forests, others banding under desperate alphas. But the freeborn pack, the ones who had stood by Aveline in the grove, who bore her woven necklaces and remembered her songs, waited. At the edge of the hollow, Darian rode alone through the snow, cloak torn, eyes haunted, to find her. He found her at the edge of the frozen lake, wind catching silver strands of her hair like moonlight spun loose. She did not look surprised to see him. Only tired. And waiting. How bad is it? She asked softly. Worse than I thought possible. Your father. Alive. Barely. The hold is gone. The wolves are turning on each other. The bloodfire spread farther than we knew. She turned toward him, lips parted, eyes full of shadowed understanding. Why come to me? Because, he swallowed, voice cracking against the cold. Because they won't follow me anymore. Not all of them. But they believe in you. He stepped closer, snow crunching beneath his boots. You're the only one who's ever brought them peace. The only one they don't fear. She hesitated, a flicker of old pain tightening her jaw. Darian, if I do this, if I sing again at the red moon, it might burn me out. It might end me. I know. The words came strangled. He looked at her then, and for once, there was no mask between them. No command. No alpha. Just a man unraveling in the shadow of the woman he could no longer pretend not to love. But I would rather lose everything, he whispered, than watch the world devour you. The song before the storm. Night fell hard and fast over the borderland. At the camp, torches flickered like trembling stars against the snowdrifts. Wolves of every shape and bloodline gathered in silence, scarred and weary, waiting. Aveline stood at the heart of the gathering, her breath a pale thread in the air. Behind her, Darian said nothing. He simply reached for her hand, held it, and stayed. She raised her voice, soft, steady, carrying like the promise of warmth in winter. To the broken bone and bleeding fang. To the child who howls but does not hang. To the wild that sleeps beneath our skin. I sing, be still. Let peace begin. Her voice rose, threads of power woven into each syllable, ancient and aching. Moon above, you bore our cries. Our curse, our blood, our hollowed lies. Now hush the rage that runs too deep, and cradle us in sacred sleep. The wolves knelt, one by one. Ears flattened. Breathing slowed. Even those who bore the edge of madness in their eyes bowed low, as if the very rhythm of their hearts bent to her song. And then, light. The snow beneath her feet shimmered. Shadows curled and twisted until they formed the outline of an ancient sigil, the same shape carved in the oldest stones of the forgotten shrines. The mark of the wolf god. And it pulsed with silver fire. The whisper between them. The song faded. Silence returned, but it was not empty. It was full of held breath. Of awe. Of faith. Darian stepped to her side, jaw clenched. You've just painted a target on your soul, he murmured. Then I suppose I'll need someone to guard it. She looked up at him, and for the first time, there was no more pretending. His forehead touched hers. Their breaths mingled. I've fought every battle they gave me, he whispered, barely audible. But I've never been more afraid than I am right now. Of what? Of losing you before I get the chance to tell you that it's always been you, Aveline. She closed her eyes, leaned into the warmth of him. Then stay beside me, she said, voice shaking. Until it's done. The final omen. As the wolves settled around her in the night, a hush fell deeper than sleep. Snow drifted silently. And in the cold white ground, the glowing sigil beneath Aveline flickered once more, then began to grow, branching outward like veins. Or roots. Or destiny. Above them, clouds tore open to reveal the red sliver of the coming moon. The storm would come, but they would face it together. Chapter 26, The Song of the Soother. There are nights the stars forget to blink. Nights when the moon hangs too close, too red, as if it bleeds quietly above the world. This was such a night. The crimson moon had risen. And with it, chaos. The fall of order. It began as a tremor beneath the frost. A whisper between pines. Then the silence shattered. Snarls pierced the dark like knives through silk. From the ravaged hills to the broken walls of Stofang Hold, the berserkers poured forth, muscle, fang, fury. They were not men anymore. Not wolves either. They were rage given form. Hunger without shape. Flesh that remembered only pain. They moved like a tide, red-eyed and silent, until they saw the freeborn camp. Then they held. And charged. Darian led the defense with steel flashing and breath smoking in the night air, his pack flanking tight at his heels. But it was not a battle. It was a massacre. The field of blood. The snow turned black with blood and ash. Trees fell. Shields split. The air burned with the stink of madness. Darian cleaved through three in a breath, but they rose again. Unthinking. Unyielding. Immortal in their ruin. Hold the line, he roared, but even his voice felt thin beneath the red sky. Tobrin took a claw to the ribs. A young she-wolf's throat opened like a petal of crimson. Bones cracked under berserker jaws. Darian's sword broke on the back of a beast that had once been a cousin. They were losing. And the moon watched. She walked into death. A sound broke the chaos. Not a scream. Not a roar. A voice. Soft. Clear. Rising from the edge of the hill like silver thread unfurling against a torn sky. Still your fury, hush the flame. Let the wild forget its name. Aveline. She walked into the field with no weapon. No armor. Only her bare feet kissing the blood-warmed snow, her silver eyes glowing with something ancient. The wind curled around her like a lover. Her hair danced like mist. And she sang, where the moonlight touches bone. Let no hall go on alone. Sleep, O fire, in cradles keep. Wolves of sorrow, fall to sleep. Every syllable held something more than music. It was command without force, power without violence. The berserkers stopped. Mid-lunge. Mid-kill. They stopped. One dropped its blade. Another whimpered like a pup. And then, one by one, they knelt. The song of the Soother. Aveline stood alone at the heart of the field, surrounded by monsters who had forgotten themselves. But they remembered her. Somewhere in their broken minds, in the red haze of engineered madness, the echo of her song reached deeper than science or bloodline. Moon above, my vow I keep. Let the wild find rest and sleep. And the world listened. Wolves from across the hollow sank to their knees. Even Darian. Even Tobrin. Even the trees seemed to bow. The red moon dimmed. And above them, stars aligned, forming a constellation unseen for centuries. The wolf god's mark. The collapse. Aveline swayed. The light that had surrounded her began to fade. Her knees buckled, her skin pale as frost. She crumpled to the snow like a fallen star. Darian broke the stillness with a cry. Aveline! He reached her before her body touched the ground, catching her in trembling arms. She was warm. Too warm. Her pulse a flutter. Her eyes barely open. I had to, she whispered, lashes brushing his cheek. I couldn't let them become monsters. You did more than that, he choked, voice rough, ragged. You saved them. You saved all of us. Tears slid down his face, silent, fierce. You did what none of us could. Because I'm not a warrior, she breathed. No, he whispered, pressing his forehead to hers. You're something far stronger. She smiled, faintly, then slipped into sleep. The omen above. The field was still. No beast moved. No bird called. And in the heavens above, the stars blazed brighter. The wolf god constellation shimmered and grew. An eighth star flickered into being. A new light. A new story. Chapter 27, His Kneeling Vow. The lake slept under moonlight. Moonlake, so named for how the surface mirrored the sky, as though the gods had poured a piece of the heavens into a bowl of glacial stone. Tonight, it shimmered silver, caught between night and eternity. Not a ripple. Not a breeze. Only silence, sacred and vast. And in the hush after salvation, the wolves gathered. Moonlight on wounds. The field beyond the lake was strewn with the exhausted, fighters wrapped in furs, wounded wolves asleep against logs, children clutching bone necklaces glowing faintly in the dark. They had survived. The red moon had passed. Because of her. Aveline stood at the lake's edge, her toes bare on the frost-glazed grass, her cloak loose around her shoulders. The moonlight caught on her pale skin, casting her not quite as human, not quite of this earth. She breathed slow, but her hands trembled. The battle was won, but at what cost? Darian approached with the silence of a warrior who had run out of war. His armor was off, his blade sheathed. For the first time, he came to her not as alpha, not as heir, but as a man. He stopped a breath away from her, close enough to feel her warmth, her weariness, her softness that had once terrified him more than death. She turned, eyes silver beneath lashes heavy with emotion. And then, slowly, deliberately, he knelt. The vow. Gasps rippled through the circle of watching wolves. Darian Vexley, the fiercest blood of the Stofang line, bowed on one knee, lowering his head to her hands. Aveline Rowan, he said, voice rough, raw, trembling under weight he could no longer carry alone. You were not born for me. You were not shaped by my hands or my fate. You do not exist to serve a mate, or soothe a cursed bloodline. He lifted his gaze, and gods, there was devotion in it. You were born for all of us. For this pack, this future. You were born to heal what power could not. He paused, chest rising like he was drowning beneath emotion too long buried. And I vow, on my blood, on the moon, on the name Vexley, whatever I become, whatever I lead, it will be with you. Or not at all. The circle held its breath. Even the trees leaned closer. And Aveline. She sank to her knees before him, not to mirror his surrender, but to meet him, to make it equal. She took his hands, her fingers weaving into his, cool against the heat of his palms. "You're wrong," she whispered, voice like snowfall. "I was born for someone." He stilled. "You." Then, leaning forward, she touched her forehead to his. And every wolf in the hollow howled. The kiss. They rose together. He cupped her cheeks, hands gentle, reverent. She tilted her face into his, eyes fluttering shut. And when he kissed her, it was not wild or possessive. It was full. Of sorrow. Of surrender. Of joy. It was the kiss of a man who had denied himself too long, now finally tasting the one thing that made the madness worth bearing. She melted into him. Their bodies curved into one another, molded by months of war, of longing, of refusal burned down to embers. He breathed her name between breaths. "Aveline." And she answered not with words, but with her mouth on his throat, a slow, lingering press of lips that said, "I see you. I claim you. I forgive you." Somewhere in the dark, an elder wolf murmured, "The gods have smiled on this." The one who watched. Far from the glow and celebration, Tobrin stood beneath a pine. Silent. Still. He did not weep. That wasn't his way. But his throat ached and his hands. His hands clenched the bone necklace she had given him, the one strung with bits of carved ash and tiny wolf teeth, warm from where it always rested near his heart. She had made it for protection. He had worn it for hope. Now he understood. She had never been his to hope for. She had always belonged to the moonlight. He pressed the bone to his lips once, a kiss without audience, a goodbye too soft to be spoken. Then he turned from the lake and vanished into the trees. The stars above. The wolves cheered. Darian and Aveline stood at the water's edge, arms around each other, not as alpha and healer, but as equals, as fated, as home. And above them, the lake reflected the sky. The constellation of the wolf god gleamed bright and whole. But just beneath it, near the lake's mirrored edge, another shimmer began to form. A shape. Not yet a star, but the beginning of one. A new legend. A new Luna. Chapter 28, Luna of the Unbroken. There were no chains in the forest that night. No crown rod of blood or claw. Only moonlight poured in silver streams over bark and bone, and the sound of wolves breathing as one. The hollow had never been so quiet, and yet never so alive. The night of Ascension. At the heart of the Soother's grove, a ring of standing stones shimmered under moonlight. The stones were ancient, veined with time, their runes older than words. Some said the first wolves had shaped them when the stars still sang. Tonight, they stood witness once more. Aveline approached the altar alone. Her bare feet brushed the moss with reverence. A robe of midnight blue wrapped her form, stitched with strands of silver thread that glinted with each step. Her silver eyes held no fear, only the calm of oceans that had weathered every storm. The grove was lined with those who had followed her, warriors, younglings, healers, elders. Darian stood nearest the stone circle, watching as though she were the first dawn he had ever seen. She stepped into the light of the altar. It welcomed her. Garrick's gift. Old Garrick stepped forward from the shadows. Once a hunter, now a lorekeeper, his eyes were misted with age, but sharp with truth. He knelt, though none had asked him to. "The blood sings in you," he rasped. "We lost the name, but not the memory. And now..." He offered her the relic, a battered tome bound in dark leather, its pages thick with ash-scented parchment. "The prophecy calls her the daughter of the moon's breath." His voice trembled. "The one whose soul stills madness. The Luna not born, but awakened." The crowd whispered, murmured, bowed. And from high above, as if summoned by belief itself, the constellation of the wolf god shimmered into view. But tonight, it was not alone. Beside it, a new formation flickered into life. A crescent within a hull. A star where none had been. Aveline lifted her face. The light kissed her brow. And the world knew. The blood oath. Darian stepped forward. No armor. No blade. Only a ceremonial sash drawn across his chest, woven in black and silver, a single bone clasp resting above his heart, the one Aveline had given him the night he almost lost everything. He dropped to one knee, but not like a warrior submitting, like a soul finding sanctuary. He took her hand. His voice was deep but unsteady, trembling under the weight of what he felt and had never dared say aloud. I once believed my soul was cursed, that I would lead only ruin. He looked up at her, amber eyes burning. But you stood beside me, not because you were bound to, but because you chose to. So I choose now. Freely. Fully. He sliced his palm. Let the blood drip onto the altar stone. My blood is yours. My body, my howl, my will, yours. He pressed his forehead to her fingers. My soul belongs to you, Luna of the Unbroken. Aveline's eyes filled with light. Not tears. Something older. Something divine. She cupped his face. Then let us belong to each other. And when she leaned down to kiss him, the stars flared. The union. They stood before the altar, hands bound in silver thread, hearts beating as one. The circle of wolves erupted into a chant, ancient and primal, as the trees themselves swayed, as if dancing in honor. Luna. 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 The chant echoed across the valley. Through the riftwood. Into Stofang. Across the old bloodlines that had forgotten gentleness. Aveline turned to the gathered pack. Her voice rang like a bell through snow and silence. We are no longer ruled by fear. No longer broken by rage. Tonight, we begin again. Not by what we were born to do, but by what we choose to become. The howls that followed were not violent. They were hopeful. The page that burned. Later, after the chants had died and the stars had begun to fade, Garrick sat beside the fire, the ancient book open in his lap. He turned the pages carefully, reverently, and frowned. One page near the back charred. Not by time, but by heat. A sigil warped by flame. A name half erased. He touched it with shaking fingers. There's more, he whispered. But he said nothing. Not yet. He closed the book as Aveline laughed in the distance, her head tipped back, her silver hair loose in the wind as Darian lifted her off her feet in a rare burst of joy. The moon hung heavy above. Watching. Waiting. Knowing the story was not yet done. Chapter 29. The Price of Peace. There was no thunder after the storm. Only the hush that follows miracles. And the ache that follows sacrifice. The stillness after. The Soother's grove had never been so silent. Not with reverence, but with caution. Because even peace in Velmora came at a cost. Inside the small stone hut tucked deep in the grove's edge, half covered in ivy and dew-glossed petals, Aveline lay on a bed of furs, her body unmoving beneath thin linen. Her breath was even, but faint. Her skin ghost-pale against the twilight shadows. And her ears still rang with the echo of them, the cries she'd silenced, the madness she'd soothed, the blood she'd held back with her very soul. Every time she blinked, light fractured into silver shards. And through it all, she could hear only the thrum of her own failing pulse. Myra's vigil. Mistress Mira sat at her side, bent over a bowl of crushed dawnroot and crushed starleaf, her knotted fingers deft and stained green. Her long gray braid hung like a vine over her shoulder, lips muttering charms as old as the hollow itself. She dipped a carved spoon into the warm mix, and with practiced gentleness, pressed it to Aveline's lips. Drink, she whispered. You've held back the night. Now let the light return. Aveline swallowed, barely. Her throat moved, her eyes fluttered, but she didn't speak. Until, it's louder in the quiet, she murmured. Mira froze. The silence screams, doesn't it? The old healer said softly. That's how you know you've touched something sacred. Or something broken. Aveline turned her head slowly. Which am I? Mira cupped her cheek with wrinkled warmth. Both. Darian's offering. He came just before dawn. Damp with dew, dirt on his palms, sleeves rolled up and cloak dusted in pollen. A satchel slung over his shoulder. In his hands, dawn petal blooms, still wet with morning tears. Aveline stirred at the scent before he even spoke. "You're not supposed to be here yet," Mira scolded, but softer than usual. "I know." Darian knelt beside the bed. His voice was raw with fatigue, deeper with worry. "But I had to bring these." She always said they reminded her of the morning sky. He held them out like an offering to the gods. Or perhaps to the goddess that now lay in silence. Aveline cracked one eye open. "You remembered." Her voice was gravel and grace. "I remember everything about you," Darian whispered. He took her hand. "Careful." As if she might vanish like smoke. "You already saved us. You don't have to do more." She smiled faintly. "You forget. I never did it for us. I did it for you." His jaw clenched. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against her fingers. His voice was barely audible. "You've already done enough. Let me carry you now." The ritual of the water. That night, when no one watched, Aveline rose. She waited until Mira had dozed off in her chair, breath slow and hands still. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and stepped barefoot into the cold. The forest welcomed her like an old ache. She walked slowly to the creek behind the hut, where frost-kissed stones bordered the flowing silver stream. The moon painted the water like silk. Stars flickered above. Aveline knelt at the bank. Her reflection looked unfamiliar, too pale, too tired, too quiet. She dipped her hands in the icy water. Washed once. Then again. Then again. Each time slower. Harder. Like she was trying to scrub away the feeling of her own fragility. The third time, she let her breath hitch. Tears never came. Only silence. The children come. The next day, the youngest wolves came to visit. They crept in like whispers, small claws clicking on stone, for still baby soft, eyes wide and filled with awe. She was their Luna. Their lullaby. They brought her woven trinkets, small flowers, and one bone pendant shaped like a crescent moon. Aveline sat in the rocking chair on the porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, and smiled like she wasn't slowly drowning inside. She opened her arms. They rushed into her like a tide. And she began to hum. The soothing song. "Hush now, wild one, the night has no teeth. Sleep where the moon guards, dream soft beneath. Your heart beats a whisper, your breath is a flame. And I'll sing the dark into forgetting your name." They curled around her, tails twitching. She sang until their breathing synced. Until even the trees leaned in to listen. Until she forgot how tired she truly was. Mira's discovery. That evening, Mira returned to her herb table. The bowl of crushed dawnroot from earlier still steamed faintly. The cloth of Aveline had coughed into lay beside it, spotted red. But what made Mira pause was the reaction. She dropped a single thread of Aveline's blood into the bowl. The herbs flared. Not burned. Not spoiled. They glowed. Soft blue. Then gold. Then a pulse, like a heart beating back. Mira staggered back. Her journal lay nearby. She opened it with shaking fingers and began to write. Her strength isn't fading. It's changing. She is not spent. She is still becoming. Chapter 30. Letters in the Wind. The wind at the edge of the hollow always carried secrets. It brushed past tall grass and bones tied to branches, threaded through the wooden beams of the border village like a voice half forgotten, whispering things meant only for those who still listened with their hearts, not just their ears. That morning, Aveline heard it again. And this time, she answered. The letter beneath the floorboards. The note had yellowed with time. Pressed between the pages of an old binding of runes, tucked beneath the loose floorboard of the healing hut. Not forgotten, just waiting. She found it as she reached for a forgotten pouch of moonleaf, fingertips brushing paper instead of parchment. The moment she opened it, she knew the hand. Tobrin's. Sparse, honest ink. Like him. Each stroke measured. Controlled. Bruised with restraint. _ I leave with no anger. Only silence. You are more than anyone could deserve, and less than anyone should ever bear. If he sees you, if he reaches for you, don't make him chase. Let him catch you. That's what love does. It stays. And if you ever wonder if I still watch the hollow skies, yes, always. Underscore. Her breath hitched. The ink was smudged at the bottom. One thumbprint. One tear, perhaps. She didn't read it again. She simply folded it with both hands, pressed it to her chest, and whispered, "You too are cherished." She handed the letter to a young scout from the outer range. A quiet female with swift feet and a messenger's oath. Find him. If he'll read it, he'll know it's from me. Darian finds the fold. That night, Darian found her by moonlight. She sat on the porch of the elder's hut, bare feet propped against the worn step, hair loose and silvered like ash under the starlight. The last of the day's warmth clung to her shawl, and her fingers worked bone and twine with gentle rhythm, crafting necklaces for the cubs. He didn't speak at first, just knelt beside her, hands resting on his knees. But she felt the shift. The ache coiled behind his silence. And when she turned, he was holding the letter. Folded again. Read and reread, his thumb worn along the crease. I found it, he said at last, voice taut with something deeper than jealousy, regret. You didn't have to hide it. I didn't, she said gently, laying another finished charm on the pile. It hid itself. He looked down, then up again. The moonlight made his eyes look almost golden. I hated him for a long time. Her brows lifted softly. Not in judgment, but in understanding. He was the first one who saw you, Darian went on. Not as a healer. Not as a weakness. But as you. She smiled, faint and a little sad. But not the last. He nodded once, then reached for her hand. Their fingers met, his callous thumb brushing her knuckles like a vow he hadn't dared to make until now. I almost lost you, he said hoarsely. Not to death. Not to war. But to my silence. She squeezed his hand. Then say it. He leaned in, just enough that his words grazed the edge of her jaw. I see you now. And I'm not letting go. The Moon Lake silence. The following evening, they walked together to Moon Lake. No guards. No ceremony. Just the two of them. The shoreline glittered under the crescent sky, silver rippling with every breath of wind. Aveline carried a satchel full of carved bones. Tiny ones, each smoothed by hand, polished with care. Her thumb traced over each one as they sat together at the edge of the dock. Darian picked up the stringing needle. She stilled. You know how? He smirked. You forget I was raised by a war widow. My mother made every Vexley boy sew, string, and sharpen blades by 6 summers. He threaded the first cord through. She handed him the next charm. For a long while, they didn't speak. Only exchanged charms and smiles, slow and warm. Until, what would you have done, she asked softly, if I had chosen him? Darian's jaw tensed. But his voice was steady. I would have watched. And protected. From a distance. Like he does now. A pause. I would have lived with the ache. But I would never have blamed you. Aveline reached over, brushing a knuckle down his cheek. Then it's a good thing I stayed. He leaned in again, kissing the inside of her wrist. Slow. Devout. Not out of possession, but gratitude. The wind answers back. When the necklaces were done, they placed them in a shallow wooden bowl. Darian lifted it high, letting the moon bless each charm with a kiss of light. A wind stirred the water. The reeds leaned inward. The moonlight shimmered on the surface, and then, as if in answer, a single, tiny ripple curved across the lake, like a caress returned. Aveline blinked slowly. And smiled. Far away, beyond the hollow, past the riftwood's edge, someone stood beneath the stars and unfolded her letter. And though she'd never hear his voice again, she knew his silence had answered hers. The last words of the page. Darian took her hand as they stood to go. Not in hunger. Not in pain. But in peace. Do you still miss him? He asked, quiet as the lake. She didn't lie. Sometimes. But missing someone doesn't mean you want them back. It means they mattered. He kissed her temple. And what am I? She tilted her head, rested it against his shoulder. You're not someone I miss. You're someone I stay for. And as they walked back toward the hollow, bone necklaces in one hand, and each other in the other, the wind rose again behind them, carrying letters, and blessings, and the softest promise. Not all goodbyes are forever. Chapter 31, The Day We Danced. The moon rose early that night, slipping into the sky like a secret too beautiful to be hidden. Its silver poured down over Moon Lake, gilding the waters until they shimmered like a dream caught in a mirror. Firelight danced along the shore, flickering in the eyes of those who had fought and bled, survived and healed. Tonight, there would be no mourning. Tonight, they danced. The gathering. The freedom wolves, once scattered, once lost, gathered in a circle carved by time and tradition. Wildflowers were braided through thick hair, furs worn loose at the shoulders, bone ornaments clinking with every laugh. Children darted between legs, yipping in delight, and the scent of roasted meat mingled with herbs Aveline herself had dried weeks ago. She stood at the edge of it all, watching. Soft shawl over her shoulders, moonlight in her hair. Her hands, always busy, now held nothing. She wasn't healing anyone. She wasn't calming anyone. She was simply present, and, perhaps for the first time, truly seen. A murmur rippled through the gathered wolves as Darian stepped forward. He wasn't in armor. Not tonight. Only a loose black tunic that clung to his shoulders and left his throat bare, shadows catching in the hollow of his collarbones, and his amber eyes bright beneath the stars. He held out a hand. Aveline, he said, voice low, coaxing, not commanding. She stepped forward, wordlessly, and placed her hand in his. The dance. They moved with a rhythm older than memory. There was no music save for the lapping of lake water, the sigh of wind through reeds, the low hum of wolves swaying around them in a loose circle of reverence. Aveline's steps were light, but unsure at first, until he drew her closer, hand to her waist, palm to her spine, and her body remembered what her heart already knew. The first time I saw you, Darian murmured against her hair, I wanted to protect you. She glanced up, silver eyes searching his. He continued, voice barely a breath, but I thought only strong things deserved to be protected. Only warriors. Fighters. Blood sworn. She leaned into him. And now? He twirled her gently, then caught her again, chest against hers. Now I know strength comes in different forms. Yours saved us all. Her lips curved into a quiet smile. I didn't save anyone. I just didn't leave. He stilled, then pressed his forehead to hers. Exactly. Their dance slowed. Not out of exhaustion, but intention. As if the world narrowed to the space between their breaths. She clutched his shirt. He held her like she was the only prayer he still believed in. And around them, the hollow watched. The light in their hands. As their dance slowed to a gentle sway, the younger wolves began to creep forward. Some toddled, some crawled. In their small hands, they wore necklaces, each one woven by Aveline in quiet hours, each bearing a tiny carved bone, a symbol of their healing. They encircled her and Darian, wide-eyed and beaming. Then, without prompt, they all tilted their heads toward the moon. And howled. It was high-pitched and awkward, but pure. It rang through the night like bells in snowfall. Then light. A soft, pale shimmer pulsed from the bone charms on their necks. Faint at first. Then brighter. The light didn't burn. It pulsed like a heartbeat, gentle and rhythmic, moon silver instead of flame. Aveline gasped softly and fell to one knee, her fingers brushing the ground. Darian dropped with her, arms tight around her back. Are you all right? She laughed through breathless tears. I'm fine. It's not pain. It's just too much beauty. The wolves around them bowed their heads in quiet awe. And at the edge of the circle, Garrick, old hunter and record keeper, watched with narrowed eyes, the glow reflecting in his pupils like prophecy. Later, he would write, _ her hands give more than comfort. They give connection. Her gifts hold Luna's breath. Underscore. Whispers beneath the moon. After the crowd faded into firelight, after wine had softened even the most hardened warriors, Darian and Aveline remained by the lakeshore. They didn't speak at first. He traced small circles on her palm. She leaned her head on his shoulder, eyes half-lidded, skin bathed in silver. "Do you still fear your bloodline?" she asked at last. He didn't answer right away. Then, "No, not when you're beside me. The madness fades when you hold me like I'm worth loving." She turned to him slowly, then kissed him. It wasn't hungry. Not tonight. It was slow, steady, like water smoothing over stone. His hand slid into her hair, her fingers splaying across his chest. And though nothing more was needed, they knew, every brush of lips, every sigh into skin, promised more when they were ready. "We'll have more nights," she whispered. "You don't have to rush this." He smiled against her temple. "I'm not rushing. I'm just learning what it means to be held. Not obeyed. Not feared. Just held." Moonlight epilogue. Far across the water, the fire had burned low. The lake was still. The necklaces glowed softly from where they lay in the arms of sleeping cubs. Darian's arms remained around Aveline. She drifted in and out of dreams, ones not full of screams or broken vows, but soft promises, strung together like pearls on a thread. He held her tighter and whispered, more to himself than her. "We made it." She stirred, a faint smile curving her lips even in sleep. "Yes," she murmured. "We did." Chapter 32. A Name Among Wolves. The Hall of Echoes, known to few as the Wolves' Record Hall, was carved into the very bones of the mountain. No door barred entry, but few dared approach without purpose. Here, memories were etched in stone. Not by quill nor ink, but by claw and oath. And today, it would remember her. The chill air inside whispered of time. Wind sang through old fractures in the stone, brushing over engraved names of warriors, leaders, martyrs. But never, until now, a soother. Never a woman who had calmed with lullabies what no blade could pierce. Never a Luna who had not fought, but instead, healed. The ceremony of naming. Aveline stood in silence. Cloaked in deep silver, the hem of her robe brushed ancient dust. Her hair, long and loose, gleamed like wet moonlight. Darian stood beside her in ceremonial black, no longer shadowed by his lineage, but made brighter by the pride in his gaze. The hall was full, elders, youngbloods, warriors, and wolves who had once called themselves nothing at all. Now they stood as one. The stone elder in the center, whose name had long since been swallowed by time, turned with a voice like groaning timber. "Step forward, Aveline Rowan. Daughter not of bloodline, but of mercy." She obeyed. One step. Two. Each heartbeat an echo. "You enter not by conquest," the elder continued, "but by choice. Not by fury, but by flame of stillness." He raised a carved bone tablet. The symbols etched into it were not of the present tongue. Some older language, some forgotten howl from the first moons. "Do you accept the name the spirits have given?" Aveline's voice was soft, but certain. "Yes." The elder's eyes, pale and milky, fixed on her as if seeing something more than skin. "Then by moon and stone, by blood and howl, we name you." The breath beneath the silence. Luna of the Unbroken. Daughter of the moon's rest. The moon soothed. The one who held the mad and they slept. A hum rippled through the crowd. No shouting. No applause. Only reverence. Darian's declaration. Darian stepped forward, shoulders squared, eyes burning gold beneath the flickering firelight. But his voice, when it came, was gentle, almost reverent. "She is not mine to claim," he said, gaze moving across the crowd. "She is not my shadow, nor a figure at my side." He turned to her. His voice softened. "She is our hope. The calm at the end of battle. The warmth after cold rage. The reminder that we are not only beasts. And if you ever look upon her and ask yourself how she endured, remember this." He took her hand, pressing it to his chest. "She didn't come here to rule. She came here to stay. To choose us." Aveline blinked, her vision blurred by tears. But she smiled and whispered, not for the crowd, but for him alone. "And I'd choose you again, even if it destroyed me." The Stone of the Starborn. As the ceremony closed, a figure stepped forth from the rear of the crowd. Garrick, the old hunter, ever silent, ever watching, bore a weight in both arms. A flat, dark stone slab, worn smooth save for a single symbol carved deeply at its center. "It was buried beneath the roots of the moon altar," he said. "Left by the first wolves, they say. I did not understand it, not until now." He turned it toward the crowd. The sigil glowed faintly, a curling symbol that shimmered with a light not born of flame, nor reflected moon. It pulsed once, then faded. Garrick offered it to Aveline with a bow. "This is not a gift," he said. "It is a return. This was always yours." She took it into trembling hands. The moment her skin touched stone, her breath caught. Something ancient stirred in her veins, not a rush, not pain. Unknowing. A hush fell. Darian moved to her side, his fingers gently brushing hers. "What does it mean?" She shook her head, lips parting. "I don't know yet. But it feels like part of me." Garrick studied her quietly. Then, just before he turned away, he murmured low, only the stone walls heard. "There's one more line. A symbol not yet translated. I think it's her name. But I fear it hasn't been written yet. After the stones are etched." Hours later, when the wolves returned to their dens and the hall grew dim, Aveline remained behind. She ran her fingers over the etched names, some cracked, some faded. Then, gently, she pressed her own palm to the freshly carved line that bore her title. "Aveline Rowan," the moon soothed. She smiled. Not from pride, but from finally knowing she mattered, not because she was fierce, not because she could lead armies, but because she chose to stay soft, even when the world demanded she shatter. Footsteps approached. She didn't need to look. Darian wrapped his arms around her from behind, pressing his forehead to the curve of her neck. They stood in silence. The stones around them, ancient and solemn, now hummed with something new, something soft, enduring, something like love. Chapter 33, A Night Without Fear. The snow in Stillroot Forest fell like whispered blessings, slow and deliberate, each flake glinting faintly under a full, quiet moon. It was the first time in living memory that no one stood watch. No sentries. No howls in the dark. No scent of madness rising like blood on the wind. Only peace. And the sound of breathing. Dozens of steady, soft, untroubled breaths, wolves and wolfkin curled close beside their kin, their mates, their Luna. And Aveline stood in the heart of it all. Wrapped in a pale wool cloak, bare feet dusted with snow, she could feel the rhythm of the forest like a second heartbeat. The wild was no longer trembling. It was resting, just as she was. The breath of children. The younglings had insisted on sleeping closest to her tonight. Half-shifting, warm and clumsy, still learning the ways of fangs and paws. Little paws nudged her thigh. A tufted ear twitched beneath her hand. Aveline sat against the roots of an old twisted tree, one arm curled around a pup, her other hand idly combing through another's fur as they snuggled close, eyes heavy with dreams. She hummed at first. Just low murmurs that kissed the cold air, soft as snowmelt. Then she began to sing. Words carried in a voice that felt woven from starlight and pine smoke, shaped not to command, but to soothe. Musical notes: "Sleep now, child, the moon keeps time." Beneath the bough, in softest rhyme. "No teeth shall snap, no claws shall near, while Luna's hum is all you hear. So hush the world with your soft breath. You are not alone in night or death. My arms, the roots, my voice, the flame. You'll wake and still be whole." The same musical note. The pup's breath slowed, and the quiet deepened. Her song drifted into silence. Darian's quiet truth. From the shadows behind the elder pine, Darian stepped forward. No boots. No cloak. Just him, sleeves rolled, hands bare, breath misting silver as he knelt beside her, shoulder brushing hers. He watched the children with her. Then, without looking up, he whispered, "You gave them peace." His hand sought hers, fingers rough from battle but reverent as they slid between hers. "And you gave me something I didn't know I needed. Something I didn't think I deserved." She turned toward him, snowflakes caught in her lashes. "What did I give you?" He exhaled, eyes never leaving hers. "A night without fear." The burying of the cloak. Later, when the pups had settled fully and the sky hung heavy with stars, Aveline rose. Darian followed her without words, his presence a quiet gravity. She walked to a grove of silver aspens, their bark etched like pale runes, and knelt. From within her pack, she drew something bundled tight, a piece of her old cloak, worn and torn, still stained faintly at the edges from that first night in the forest, the night she almost didn't survive. The night she'd first feared herself more than the world around her. She dug a small hole into the snow-covered earth. Her fingers, numb and trembling, smoothed the soil like a blessing. She pressed the cloak into the ground. "I was always afraid," she whispered, "that if I wasn't useful, I'd be left behind." Her voice trembled like wind over ice. "That loving something meant I'd lose it." Darian knelt beside her, wordless. She looked up at the trees, at the full moon filtering through, then down again. "But I'm not afraid anymore. I'm not surviving. I'm here." She covered the cloak with earth and snow. As she smoothed it over, a soft light flickered across the ground. Darian stilled. In the snow above the buried cloth, a faint symbol shimmered, not drawn by hand, not shaped by logic. A wolf's eye. A crescent moon nested within its gaze. A divine echo. The mark of the wolf god. Neither of them spoke. The snow fell in reverent silence. No more armor. That night, they returned to their own tent. Not as Alpha and Luna. Not as soldier and healer. But simply as Darian and Aveline. He helped her unbraid her hair. She slid the last pin from his shirt. They undressed like unpeeling wounds, like shedding old selves. No urgency. No desperation. Just hands exploring familiarity as if it were new again. Mouths learning worship. Breath tingling in the hush of firelight and fur pelts. His touch held no hunger tonight. Only awe. And in her eyes, no fear. Only the shimmer of moonlight and a woman who had finally come home, to herself, to him, to the wolves that now dreamed safely beneath the stars. Chapter 34. The wolf at her side. The frost hadn't yet melted from the edge of the moon lake, but sunlight shimmered over its frozen rim like honey on glass. The wind was gentle, brushing through the pine boughs as though the forest itself had exhaled, slow and grateful. The war was over. No blood in the snow. No red moon on the rise. Just life, ordinary and tender. Aveline sat on a woven mat of dried reeds, her hands moving with quiet focus as she threaded a bone charm through a loop of leather cord. She was kneeling, sunlight spilling over her shoulders like a blessing, lips curled with concentration. Across from her sat Darian, sleeves rolled to his elbows, fingers clumsily trying to copy her movements. "Careful," she murmured, eyes flicking to his. "If you loop too tight, the thread will snap." "I'm not used to delicate things," he replied, wincing as the leather slid awkwardly through his calloused grip. "Steel never complains." Aveline smiled, not with pity, but with that knowing softness that made him feel less like a beast, more like something still becoming. "You're better with this than you think," she said, tying the charm with a swift flick of her wrist. "You just don't realize you're allowed to be gentle." His eyes met hers. And in them, no alpha fire, no battle fury, just warmth. "I'm not an alpha anymore," he said lowly, almost like a confession. "Not really. Not in the way they trained me to be. I'm your shadow now. Your protector." She tilted her head, reached across the space between them, and pressed a bone charm into his palm. "Then be both," she whispered. "Be the alpha when the world needs it. And the wolf at my side when I do." Names and knots. The task at hand wasn't urgent. Not like healing wounds or commanding battlefields. But it mattered. Each necklace was meant for a youngling, tiny wolf pups who had survived the red moon, their parents lost or broken. Aveline had begun crafting them from bones of hunted prey, inlaid with river stones and teeth, each knot woven with intention. One knot for courage, one for comfort, one for memory. And on each necklace, she etched a name. Leora, she said, handing the charm to Darian. She likes to chase butterflies and sleep in warm laundry. Her brother is Kellen, the quiet one who cries when it rains. Darian frowned slightly as he carved the name into the charm. You remember them all? Of course I do, she said, tone soft. If no one remembers their names, how will they ever know they mattered? He stilled, fingers pausing at the cord. Then he looked at her, not with desire or awe, but that rarest kind of reverence. The kind that made you want to kneel. He didn't. But something in his chest shifted. Teach me, he said quietly. I want to remember them too. The dream beneath the pines. That night, the wolves slept in clusters around the lake. Some in fur, some in skin, some half-shifted into in-between shapes, curled together for warmth and peace. Darian and Aveline lay beside the roots of a gnarled tree, wrapped in furs, his arm beneath her head, her fingers resting above his heart. The fire crackled nearby. A pup whimpered in its sleep. And Aveline dreamed. She stood in a silver field beneath a sky that pulsed like breath. Stars moved slowly overhead, and from their shimmering chorus stepped a figure, neither wolf nor man. The wolf god. Eyes like moons. Fur like fog. A presence not made of flesh but feeling, something primal and protective, old as grief and deeper than hope. You've changed them, came a voice not in her ears, but in her bones. Not through blood. Not through war. But through quiet hands and patient hearts. The wolf stepped closer. Its breath stirred her hair. Your tenderness will guard them, even when you're gone. They will sing your name when the world forgets its own. Then it bowed its head. To her. Aveline woke with a gasp, sitting upright in the dark. Darian stirred beside her, instantly alert, reaching for her hand. What is it? He asked, voice rough with sleep. She turned to him, her eyes full of something that didn't yet have a name. Instead of answering, she gripped his hand tightly and pressed it against her chest, right over her heart. I dreamed of the wolf god, she whispered. He didn't speak. He simply shifted closer, pulling her into him, wrapping his arms around her like a vow. The one they chose. The following morning, the sun rose slow and shy. The pups came running for their necklaces, tumbling over one another like spring foxes. Each name was whispered aloud, each charm tied gently around each small neck by Darian and Aveline together. They weren't just Luna and Alpha anymore. They were something else. A root system. A hearth. A new story. The older wolves began calling her the moon's breath. Not out of tradition. Out of truth. When one pup grew scared of the wind, it ran to her. When another grew too wild with rage, it crawled into Darian's lap and fell asleep against his heartbeat. They were no longer feared. They were followed. The broken wolves, the exiled ones, the unblooded, began weaving their homes closer around Aveline and Darian's. Not out of command, but because they had finally found peace in the shadow of gentleness. And that night, when the fires dimmed and the snow whispered its hush again across the hollow, Darian pulled Aveline close beneath their furs. He kissed her wrist, her collarbone, the scar just behind her ear from the battle she almost didn't wake from. Does it ever feel real? He murmured. She smiled into the curve of his shoulder. It does now. And when she closed her eyes, she dreamed again, not of war or prophecy, but of a meadow full of names, each one stitched into the stars above, glowing like memory. Chapter 35. The Calm Beyond the Storm. The sky above White Shadow Hollow was the softest shade of pearl, washed clean by snowfall, tinged with morning gold. Silence held the highlands like breath before a kiss. No more crimson moons. No screams in the trees. Only quiet and the promise that peace had finally come. And yet, as she stood on the snow-draped rise of the lunar high grounds, Aveline could feel the ache of something ending. Or perhaps, beginning anew. Wind whispered through her braid, tugging at the fur-lined cloak wrapped tight around her shoulders, her last cloak. Its tattered edges bore the memory of every battle she never meant to fight. Blood, ash, hope, loss. All stitched into that weather-worn fabric like a history she'd carried long enough. She knelt, bare fingers trembling slightly as she held the wolf god totem in her palms. The carved bones shimmered faintly in the light, each ancient rune etched by hand, passed down through generations of warriors who had believed power lived in fangs alone. She didn't bury it with reverence. She buried it with truth. The snow hissed softly as she pressed the totem beneath the frozen earth, her breath blooming before her like spirit smoke. Next time, she whispered to the sky, voice steady despite the tears threading her lashes. Please don't make them fear tenderness. Behind her, the sound of boots crunching snow. Darian. No longer an alpha crowned by blood, but a man remade by devotion. His hand brushed her shoulder, grounding her without weight. Are you sure? He asked, his voice low, like winter wind through pine. She turned to him. I'm not sure of anything, she said honestly. But I know I don't want the old ways buried inside me anymore. He looked down at her, and then, without ceremony, knelt too. Side by side, they pressed their hands to the snow-packed soil. She over the totem. He over hers. No matter what comes, Darian murmured, I'll be here. Even if the red moon returns. Even if the world forgets your name. I won't. The wind sighed around them, wrapping them in silence so profound, it felt sacred. Below, the wolves had gathered, pups on mothers' backs, scarred scouts, wide-eyed elders, watching, waiting. They didn't speak. They didn't howl. But one by one they bowed, muzzles to earth. A soft, wordless salute to the Luna who had given them more than survival. She had given them peace. The ledger of legacy. High on a ledge overlooking the clearing, Garrick sat on a moss-padded stone, a leather-bound journal balanced on his knee. He watched Aveline not with awe, but understanding, like a hunter who'd once chased ghosts, and finally found one willing to be touched. He dipped his quill and wrote slowly. She laid to rest the god of blood. She asked for a future with gentleness, and the wilds heard her. Then, below that, she is no longer legend in the making. She is the turning point. The myth that walked with bare feet and sang lullabies to rage. He paused, and with a hunter's intuition, looked back to where Aveline knelt beside Darian. The snow around them shimmered faintly, just enough for someone with old eyes to see the wolf god's sigil flicker for a breath and vanish again beneath the frost. He did not smile, but his hand trembled. She is still changing us, he whispered. Twilight between wolves. That evening, the hollow pulsed with a quiet sort of celebration. No feasts. No howls. Just warmth in furs, kindling fires, shared glances and shared songs. Aveline and Darian stood just beyond the firelight, side by side beneath a pine heavy with snow. His hand found hers. You don't have to carry it all anymore, he said. I'm not, she replied. We're carrying it together now. Then, softly, she leaned against him, her body sliding perfectly into the curve of his. They didn't kiss. Didn't speak. Just stood there as dusk fell, letting the stillness between them say everything. Later, they returned to the altar. No audience. No torches. Just moonlight. Aveline stepped barefoot into the snow, wearing a simple shift of wool, her silver-gray eyes lifted to the sky. And, for the first time in a long, long time, she didn't pray for strength. She didn't beg for answers. She didn't tremble. She just breathed. Let it end, she whispered, voice nearly inaudible. Let it begin. In the hollow's heart. Far below, wolves slept curled in pairs and packs. Pups dreamed of stars and safe places. Elders whispered stories of how it used to be and how it might be again. And somewhere beneath them, beneath earth and snow and time itself, the buried totem pulsed with a subtle glow. A flicker. A promise. a heartbeat waiting for the world to shift again. But for now, for this night, there was no red moon, no storm, no fear, just the calm, and the wolf at her side.